Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the DN WhatIf with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku's Truth Quirk Unleashed Word Vomit in Class 1A. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Summary. So we'll just blurt out random things? Mina asked. Like the fact that I can't eat sandwiches not cut down the middle? Snickers rose from the class as she turned a bright red. Aizawa sighed. Not exactly. The quirk is a weird mix between a truth quirk and a prone to suggestion quirk. Thanks to the boy's parents, it means you'll be under the effects of a normal truth quirk, but you also won't have the ability to keep yourselves from oversharing. So we'll all be spouting fucking word vomit like Deku. Yes, Bakugo. Fucking word vomit. Our Class 1A is hit by a very powerful truth quirk, and lots of things come out. Some things are quite harmless, quite the opposite. Really, others are quite funny, and some open wounds that never really healed. Notes. See the end of the work for notes and other works inspired by this one. Chapter 1. Hit by a very inconvenient quirk. Notes. Have you ever been reading a fic, watching a show, and thought, why don't they just talk to each other? Well, then this is the fic for you, my good friend. Enjoy. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. So you're saying this will last a whole month? Uraraka exclaimed. As far as the quirk specialists are saying, yes, Aizawa said tiredly. The light from the windows cast a shadow over his face that made him almost look like a ghost. The child that caused this doesn't have a very good handle on their quirk, and it's a powerful one. A month is the least amount of time it will last. It's lucky just this class was affected. So we'll just blurt out random things? Mina asked. Like the fact that I can't eat sandwiches not cut down the middle? Snickers rose from the class as she turned a bright red. Aizawa sighed. Not exactly. The quirk is a weird mix between a truth quirk and a prone to suggestion quirk. Thanks to the boy's parents, it means you'll be under the effects of a normal truth quirk, but you also won't have the ability to keep yourselves from oversharing. So we'll all be spouting fucking word vomit like Deku. Yes, Bakugo. Fucking word vomit. This doesn't make sense, Midoriya cried. There's no way a quirk of someone so young would be powerful enough to work on such a large group of people for so long, and even if it were, why was the range of the initial blast so small if it was that powerful? The logistics alone. Shut up, nerd. It doesn't matter how it works, Mr. Aizawa said, already looking even more exhausted than he had at the beginning of class. As of right now, due to this quirk, you are not to leave campus, your phones are being confiscated, and the Wi-Fi is being shut down in your dorm. Numerous protests accompanied this announcement, and Aizawa gave them a subtle glare to quiet them. I feel like I don't need to remind you that if anything confidential were to get out due to this quirk, it would be disastrous. Most of the class paled at that. The idea of one of them spilling information that the media, or worse, the villains could use for their own malicious intent was enough to shut them up about having no internet or phones for so long. That being said, Aizawa continued after letting that sink in for a moment, you all will probably share things with each other you would rather keep hidden. I implore all of you to be accepting of one another's faults and words. You will all be heroes together one day, and that means you have to trust one another. The class took in what he said solemnly. If this was what they had to do because of this quirk, then that was what they were going to do. It didn't mean they had to like it. The first few unexpected truths weren't all that much. A couple of, no, I wasn't paying attentions, and a few, yes, I did the homework in homerooms in class were to be expected, especially considering the work ethic of some of the students. Those caused the class to laugh. If a bit awkwardly, it reminded them that they had to watch what they were saying at all times, even if they knew deep down there was nothing they could do about it. The first interesting truth to come out was from Bakugo. I'm not actually going to bed early, I just use that time to read romance novels because I don't want anyone to know I read them. That admission had come with a hand slapping over his mouth as the entire room stared at him before they all burst out into laughter so loud the dorms next to them could hear. Oh my god, Bakugo, Jiru wheezed with tears in her eyes. The entire rest of the self-proclaimed Bakusquad was too busy rolling on the floor to even say anything. ignoring the almost death threats that rapid-fired from the boy's mouth. If anything, the shout of, "I will metaphorically kill you," made them laugh even harder. They refused to let it go, and for hours they asked him about all of his favorite books and what part of the gushy romance stuff he liked the best. They finally dropped it when Bakugo threatened to shave all their heads, and because of the quirk they knew he was being dead serious. "Attention everyone!" Mina announced from the entrance to the common room, making everyone turn her way where she was standing with Gyro, Hagakure, and Momo. "What's up?" Kirishima asked from his place at the table where he was currently engaged in a very intense game of Uno with Kaminari and Zero, who were all finding it very hard to not shout out what cards they had in their hands. "Well, the girls and I were thinking." "It was totally your idea, Mina," Gyro interrupted. "Well, you guys supported me and everything, so you should get credit too, since you guys are my best friends and I appreciate everything." "We get it," Bakugo yelled from the kitchen. "The stupid truth quirk is making you spill your guts about love and friendship. Get to the point." Mina turned pinker than normal, rubbing the back of her neck. "Well, since Aizawa said we can't use the internet for the whole month and none of us have our phones anymore, we were thinking we should totally have a bunch of movie nights," Hagakure shouted excitedly. Yororaka shot up from her seat on the couch by Ida, eyes shining. "That's an amazing idea." "But what about the truth quirk?" Kaminari said. "Like, if we're all together all the time, won't it be even easier to reveal stuff about ourselves?" "Eh? Since when did Dunce Face get a brain?" "But think about it," Kirishima said. "We hardly ever get this time to bond with each other, but now we can since we're pretty much isolated to the dorms. I for one don't want to spend all my time holed up in my room." "Kirishima's right," Midoriya said, seemingly deep in thought. "We're all gonna be heroes together someday, and that requires a deep level of trust, just like Aizawa said. If we don't trust each other enough to sit together while anything could blurt out at any moment, we won't be very good heroes. How can civilians trust us when we can't even trust each other?" He looked around and noticed everyone staring at him. Midoriya, Ida suddenly cried, launching towards him with vigor. That was truly inspiring. As class rep, I couldn't have said it better myself. All in favor of said movie night, say aye. A chorus of enthusiastic and a couple unenthusiastic, but no one noticed, eyes rang throughout the room. Ida cleared his throat and shot a pointed look towards the kitchen, where slight grumbling could be heard before Bakugo slumped out of the kitchen and fell into a chair. "Aye," he said through his teeth, causing loud cheering from all the members of the Baka squad. "It's a good thing Bakugo agreed to come," Gyro muttered to the other girls, snickering. "I for one would love to hear more of his confessions about romance novels." She was louder than she meant to be, which meant Bakugo definitely heard her. "What did I say about shaving your head ears?" She has a point," Mina said, apparently ignoring whatever threat to her hair Bakugo was imposing. "You really don't seem the type of guy to like sappy stuff." "Well, I started liking it when I was younger, but kind of grew out of it as time went on because oh no you fucking don't you pink demon." Mina laughed but didn't stop. "Wait, if you grew out of it, then why do you still read them?" "Because it's not like I can actually have romance with a person I want, so I chose the next best thing." He snapped before his eyes widened, as did everyone else's in the room, and he promptly smacked a hand over his mouth. Mina's eyes turned to stars, and she shot up in front of Bakugo's now scarlet face, prying his hand away. Who is it? Tell us right now." The entire common room was staring at them now, and their eyes were glued to Bakugo as he slumped down in his seat, seemingly to get as far from Mina as possible. "I do not want to tell you." Everyone in the room knew how much willpower Bakugo was using right then. The effects of the quirk were extremely powerful, and to resist a direct question like that was near impossible. "Please? Who is it? I'll love you forever." She dragged out the last word as she slid down to the floor. Ida stood up abruptly. "It is extremely unheroic of us to take advantage of shitty hair," Bakugo blurted before, yet again, smacking himself in the face. He seemed to be doing that a lot lately. Nobody moved, but all eyes slowly shifted to the redhead at the table, who was growing redder by the second. Kirishima stood up slowly. Are you serious, man?" Bakugo groaned. "I am literally fucking incapable of not being serious right now, you dunderhead." Good, because I like you too. Bakugo shot out of his seat, nearly smacking into Mina on his way up. Wait, really? I mean, you were the one that just called me a dunder. Bakugo cut him off by smashing their lips together, and if the entire common room cheered, they didn't really notice. Well, maybe something good will come of this quirk, right? Midoriya said to Shinso sometime after the other two had gone upstairs for some romance reading. Well, I would hope, Todoroki said blankly from across the room, hardly looking up from his book. Because I like you as well. The green-haired boy choked. Wait, what? So, Kirishima said from his place on Bakugo's bed, unable to stop the grin from forming on his face, you really like me back. Said boy huffed from his desk chair. He was sitting on it backwards with his chin and arms resting on the back of it. It made him look quieter than normal. I mean, yeah. Kirishima's insides turned even gooier than before. He couldn't help but blurt the words out. I think I've liked you since I first saw you. You were always so strong, and I really admired that, you know. Bakugo looked uncomfortable. It wasn't like that for me. When I got to UA, everyone was just an obstacle for me. I saw this place as a tool, and I didn't care who I had to hurt to get my way. But then you tore down my stupid walls and made me actually care about someone for once. I think I realized I loved you when you reached your hand out to save me. Bakugo finally looked up at the end of his mini rant before turning pink. I mean, you love me. Yes. Kirishima realized his eyesight was turning misty as he stood and placed his hands on Katsuki's. Good. I love you too. Okay, don't freak out, Izuku told himself as he stared across the room at Todoroki. Your crush just confessed to you under the effects of a truth quirk. Yeah, totally fine. Todoroki, he said, voice slightly shaking. Double what? I'm gonna give you guys some privacy, Shinso said from next to him, and Izuku saw a trace of a smirk as he stood. And then he realized they were the only ones left in the common room. Before he knew it, the elevator doors were sliding shut, and it was just the two of them sitting alone in the almost dark room. Yeah, don't freak out. Midoriya, is it okay if I come sit next to you? Of course it is, Izuku replied before he even had a chance to think. This quirk really was something. He already had several pages in his notes dedicated to it, how it seemed to know the truth before you even had a chance to think of any lies. Todoroki sat by him, and his weight made the couch dip down slightly so that Izuku was almost leaning on him, which totally did nothing for his don't freak out mentality. Izuku took a chance and glanced up at the other boy, and found himself staring right into his eyes, and as red as he knew his face was, he couldn't seem to look away. I'm sorry, Todoroki said. I didn't mean to say that so abruptly, it's just that with this whole truth quirk thing. I get it, Izuku said as he looked down again. I've said weird things too. Earlier today, I told Sue about my underwear being All Might themed totally unprompted, and I just told you. Totally unprompted. Izuku wanted to die of embarrassment, but he heard more so felt Todoroki chuckle next to him. Very on brand for you, I must say. Izuku chuckled too, before falling into silence and oh boy, was that hard right now, and then tried to speak again very carefully. Todoroki. Shoto. Izuku blanched. What? The dual-haired boy looked a bit shocked even at his own words, but nevertheless spoke on. Call me Shoto. I think we're close enough for that. Now he knew his face was definitely red, but his mouth somehow opened on its own. In that case, call me Izuku. Was to do Shoto red now too? All right, Izuku. Oh man, this was going to end badly, he just knew it. But wait, Todoroki had already said that he liked him. So you do like me back? The words spilled from his mouth before he could stop them. That was getting very annoying very fast. I already said wait. Shoto shifted to look at him better, his eyes widening in apparent shock. Back? He looked up at him into his two-toned eyes, thinking about that moment in the sports festival where he lit up and it was beautiful, but that somehow the dark common room made him look even more so and said, yeah, back. There was a moment where neither boy said anything before Shoto really laughed, and man, if that sound wasn't the most precious thing Izuku had ever heard, and no, there definitely weren't tears in their eyes. I guess you were right, Shoto said as he put a hand on Izuku's cheek. and he suddenly became aware of how widely they were both smiling. Something good might come from this quirk after all. Izuku was on his way to homeroom hand in hand with his new boyfriend, which was incredible in its own right. Breakfast had been a fun affair, with the announcing of the second new relationship of the first 2 days under a truth quirk when All Might in his now permanently smaller form came around the corner. "Young Midoriya," he said with a wave, before catching sight of him holding hands with the dual-haired boy. "I see the truth quirk has done some good, eh?" Izuku immediately turned red, flailing his arms in an attempt to mask how flustered he was. He had to guess it probably wasn't working. "Hey All Might," he said, his voice a little too high. The hero in question simply chuckled. "Is it okay if we talk for a moment? Aizawa has already excused you from homeroom." It took all of Izuku's willpower to simply say, "Sure thing," and not the thousands of thoughts and concerns that immediately flew through his mind. He could only think of a handful of things All Might would want to talk about with him since he was under the influence of this stupid quirk, and none of them could be shared with the people he was currently with. He turned to Shoto and gave him a quick kiss on the cheek and told him he'd see him in a bit. "I really like it when you display your affection for me," Shoto said before turning bright pink. "I'll be sure to do it more then," Izuku said automatically, also turning pink, before following All Might to the teacher's lounge. "I'm guessing this is about One for All, and how it would be disastrous if I were to spill any information about it," Izuku said as he sat down on the sofa across from his mentor. "Also, that tie does not match your outfit at all." All Might coughed harshly into his hand, clearly startled by Izuku's bluntness. Man, they really weren't kidding about this quirk, were they? Izuku felt like a deer caught in headlights. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to say that out loud." All Might simply chuckled. "It's quite all right, my boy. But yes, that is precisely what I want to discuss with you." Izuku sat back in his chair, thinking for a moment. If anything about One for All were to get out, it would certainly not be good. But he did trust his classmates to not say anything about it to the media or anything, that was for sure. Would it be that big of a deal if something were to slip out unintentionally? Oh, but if Aizawa found out, he was dead for sure. "Now I wouldn't say that," All Might said. "Aizawa would certainly kill me before he even had a chance to look at you." Oh, had he said all that out loud? "Yes, you did," his mentor said, looking far too amused. "Sorry," Izuku said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm bad enough without a quirk forcing my mouth open all the time." "You have nothing to apologize for," he said with a fond smile before growing serious again. "I believe you are right, however. Any information getting released to the public due to this quirk would be disastrous, but I think you are also right in the faith you have placed in your classmates. I don't doubt every one of them will make wonderful heroes one day, and each of them has earned your trust." Izuku let out a breath he didn't know he was holding, but he was still hesitant. "But what about your secret? Are you sure you would be okay with them knowing you weren't a natural-born hero?" All Might shrugged, and his eyes were somewhat distant as he spoke. "It's not my secret to tell anymore, my boy. You are the sole holder of One for All. Now that being said, I wouldn't say anything unless you can't help it due to the quirk. I doubt this is something you would want to get out if this quirk had never happened." Izuku nodded, suddenly feeling a lot smaller, and the words poured out of his mouth before he had a chance to stop them. "I'm also worried they'll find out I used to be quirkless if the matter of One for All comes up. Most people were less than kind to me when they found out about my status back then." That was close enough to the truth, right? After all, he said it without any problems. He never really did tell his mentor the extent of the bullying, and he really didn't want to start now. But even though he was very much going around the truth with what he just said, All Might's eyes seemed to soften, as if he knew all of the turmoil Izuku had gone through in the past. "I don't believe you have to worry about that with this group, but I understand your concern. Try to steer from conversations that would reveal anything." "Oh, of course," Izuku said. "It's not like I'm gonna walk into class and say, 'All Might gave me his quirk,' right?" "Midoriya," Ada said as Izuku walked into class at the end of homeroom. "How was your talk with All Might?" "It was good," Izuku said with a smile, "and we talked about the quirk he gave me." Well, so much for that. Chapter 2, The Quirkless Kid. Notes. Trigger warnings in endnotes. Also, I'd like to say thank you for liking this fic so much. I wasn't expecting it to get so much love. Thank you. Important, I would like to point out that Aizawa wasn't hit by the quirk. I never explicitly said that, but yeah, it was just 1A. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Everybody stared at Izuku, who just stared right back. The truth quirk must have been overloaded or something because no one said anything. Yeah, so much information was probably firing through their brains that nothing was coming out of their mouths. Or they just stopped thinking altogether. Either one. The second one was happening to Izuku. He said what he said, and he couldn't take it back, so his mind was now horrifically blank. And he definitely didn't want to think of the massive can of worms he had just opened, but alas, it was not meant to be. You. Ida was still smiling, but it seemed frozen on his face, like once the sentence reached his ears he just stopped. What? Izuku felt like crawling in a hole and dying. I feel like crawling in a hole and dying. Deku. Katsuki had his head firmly on the desk in what could have been exasperation or just pure defeat. You moron. Problem child, Aizawa said as he stood, his hair floating and eyes glowing a dangerous amount. I will give you one chance. Explain. Izuku's mouth went dry, but somehow that didn't stop him from talking. All Might's quirk was called One for All, and it's been passed down for generations. I'm the next holder, and it's why I was so bad with my quirk at the start of the year, and why All Might lost his power. Why don't you just go ahead and tell them every single embarrassing moment you've ever had in your life while you're at it, he thought to himself, or that you're afraid of spiders, or that Kaken bullied you, or that you used to be. A bunch of voices cut off his thoughts. It seemed that the quirk could only be held off by confusion for so long, and soon everyone's voices were assaulting his ears, questioning Izuku and everything they had ever known about him. Questions about how that was possible, what kind of quirk it really was, when he got it, if All Might broke his bones too, if Izuku had had to lie to them, or if he just chose to, and wow, that one stung. Enough! The stern voice of Aizawa rang throughout the room, and his matching glare somehow quieted everyone down. Now, I know everyone is very interested. He shot a pointed look at Izuku as he spoke, with what Midoriya just revealed to the class. However, this is not the time for questions as we are still in school. Although, he continued with blood-red eyes that stared into Izuku's very soul, making him gulp. I would like to ask a question of my own, if that's all right with you. He was sweating buckets now. Why do I feel like I don't have a choice, sir? Aizawa smirked slightly. So you do have a brain. Good. What I would like to know then is why you didn't use that brain and inform me that you were unable to use your quirk correctly because you weren't born with it. Just how long did you have it before the start of the year? Oh great. He was dead. I got it the morning of the entrance exam, sir. Gasps and whispers broke out throughout the room, and Izuku had to fight the urge to put his face in his hands. Wait, Uraraka suddenly yelled. You hadn't used it before you saved me from that robot. Of course that would be what she would focus on. Yeah, I honestly had no clue what I was doing. Why then, Aizawa said very calmly, did you not say anything? Well, he and All Might had had a good run, right? I wasn't supposed to, sir, he said quickly. Just rip off the metaphorical band-aid. It wasn't my secret to tell, and All Might didn't want anyone to know that his quirk was transferable. Did Aizawa's eye just twitch? I see. He looked around the room, almost as if he were daring anyone to say anything, and honestly, everyone still looked too shocked to speak up. Take your seat, Midoriya. I suppose All Might and I will have to have a little chat after class. As Izuku took his seat and tried to ignore the 19 pairs of eyes following him, he desperately wished he could warn All Might of his coming demise. After class was finally over, Izuku tried to make a run for it. He really did. He figured if he could get back to the dorms quick enough he could hide in his room to avoid any questions his classmates would ask him. Could he get permission to stay in his room for the whole month? No, that was too much. But as he was packing up his stuff in record time, Aizawa's voice made him flinch. Midoriya, please see me after class. Izuku very pointedly avoided everyone's gazes as they left well, except for Shoto, Uraraka, and Ida, who looked at him with a great deal of worry in their eyes. But Izuku just waved them off with a promise to meet back at the dorms. But once everyone had left, Izuku made his way to his teacher's desk with a sense of foreboding. "Look, sir. I'm sorry you were forced to reveal that in front of the class," Aizawa said, much softer than before, surprising Izuku. "I also apologize for my rudeness. I know something like Quirk status isn't easy to share. I was simply taken aback and ashamed that we didn't accommodate for your lack of experience correctly." Izuku looked at him, mouth agape in shock. "It's my fault for not telling you." "No, that's All Might's fault," and he held up his hand before Izuku could defend the previous #1 hero. "He had a responsibility to teach you as his protege that was more important than his secret. Even telling just me would have been enough, and I'm sure you're well aware that I wouldn't have said anything to anyone." Izuku nodded. "I understand, but he also valued his image as a natural-born hero too much for me to have asked anything else of him. And I got it under control eventually, right? I was able to train with someone who knew about it during our internships." Aizawa huffed, seemingly considering his words. "I was wondering why you chose such a bizarre internship, even if that was your only offer. And I know you look up to All Might, and the trust you have in him isn't misplaced. I simply believe he could have handled the situation better." Izuku sighed. Aizawa was right. If he was being honest, All Might could have shared his problem with more of the teachers. He could have been training more effectively, and maybe he would have even more control right now. "I'm glad you think I'm right, problem child," Aizawa said dryly. Blinking in surprise, Izuku realized he had said all of that out loud. Again, "I've got to stop doing that." His teacher simply chuckled. "At least you have an excuse right now. Try and work on that now, and it'll be easier when this blasted quirk wears off." He gave him a determined nod. "I'll do my best, sir." Izuku was hoping for some sort of miracle. Really, anything could have worked. He could throw up on the spot as soon as he walked in the dorms and rush to his room claiming to be sick. All of his classmates could have suddenly been hit by a different quirk that would make them unable to speak, or maybe only able to speak Russian. He could spontaneously break his arm and have to go see Recovery Girl immediately. Actually, that last one might have been doable. Unfortunately though, none of these seemed to occur before he made it to the dorms, and he was walking very, very slowly too. And as luck would have it, all of his classmates were sitting in the common area, obviously waiting for him. Except for, "There you are," Shoto said, coming up to him from where he had clearly been pacing. He reached out and gave Izuku's hand a reassuring squeeze. "Are you okay?" Was it bad that he liked this version of his boyfriend more, who was more open and wasn't quiet out of fear of awkwardness or just plain fear? Of course he loved every part of him, but he hated seeing how much Shoto struggled because of the things he couldn't control, like anxiety. Anxiety was a bitch. "I'm perfectly fine, and I'm gonna go up to my room now," he tried to say. "I'm slightly panicking about this, but for some reason I don't really want to be alone right now." He hadn't even realized it until he said it, but he really didn't want to be alone. If he was, he would certainly start spiraling and nothing good would come of that. This truth Quirk knew him better than he knew himself, apparently. The thought was only slightly terrifying. "You can come sit with us, Deku," Uraraka said from her place on the long couch. She was sitting next to Ida, and between her and Sue there was enough room for him and Shoto. "We'll try our best to respect your boundaries, right guys?" A chorus of agreements rang out, and Izuku could tell they had discussed this before he arrived. It honestly warmed his heart that they would be so considerate of him. He was certain that they wouldn't hesitate to let him go up to his room if he wanted to, and oh boy, was there a part that wanted to, but the thing was that he trusted them, just like he had told All Might. These people were his family, and he needed their support right now. "Okay," Izuku said, shocked beyond all words that he was able to keep all that to himself. "But still, I trust you guys. You're like a family to me." "Aowa, Midoriya," Mina gushed from her seat. "We love you too." Izuku couldn't help the mistiness in his eyes at her words. He was still holding Shoto's hand, and he subconsciously latched onto Uraraka's as they sat down. "Why, yeah, love you guys." The silence that followed wasn't exactly awkward, but it was obvious that nobody knew quite what to say. Izuku definitely had no idea how to break the ice. "What do you say when you accidentally blurt out one of your biggest secrets?" I feel like we're gonna be here a lot, Shoto stated bluntly, cutting off the silence, if this quirk continues how it's been going. A couple people chuckled at his meager attempt at starting the conversation with a joke. I feel like we should set some ground rules now. Like no asking direct questions unless the person gives explicit permission, Kaminari said, before awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck. As much as we can help it anyway. This quirk is really making your words work for you, isn't it? Kirishima teased. Kaminari stuck his tongue out at him, but laughed nonetheless. Yeah, you could say that. But he's right, Ida said. We should try to keep the questions to a minimum, especially when secrets come out. We should only be together if the person feels comfortable with it. He glanced at Izuku. Are you comfortable with us being here? You said you didn't want to be alone, but if you wish we can limit this to a small group. Izuku shook his head, smiling despite his turning gut. Honestly, you all already know most of the story. And like I said, I trust you. He paused for a second and took a deep breath. And if you guys want to ask me questions, go ahead. Are you sure? Several people asked this and other variations of it at the same time, which made him smile even wider. Yeah, I am. Plus, I want everyone to know that we can trust each other in case something like this happens with anyone else. He let his words hang in the air, and everyone seemed to realize what he was saying. More people were probably going to reveal their secrets, and he wanted to set a good precedent of communication and support. He was just going to ignore the anxiety in his gut for now, he supposed. How did he give you his quirk? Momo asked almost immediately, causing everyone to stare at her. Face red, she quickly spoke again. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to sound insensitive. I've just been wondering, and once you said we could ask questions, I just couldn't keep my mouth shut anymore. It's okay, Izuku said, giving her what was hopefully a warm smile. If you mean the how as in the type of quirk it was, it's a transferable type of quirk that's been passed down for 9 generations. And if you mean the transferring part, I ate a strand of his hair. Everyone stared at him. You. Shoto was looking at him very strangely. What? I ate a strand of his hair. DNA transfer. Very anticlimactic, if you ask me. And as if a switch had been flipped, the tension in the room was gone, and it was replaced by 20 hysterically laughing teenagers. Even Katsuki was hiding a chuckle or two. With the tension gone, the questions flowed out of everyone's mouths easily. Izuku did his best to answer them all the best he could. No, All Might never broke his arms. No, he didn't know who all had held it before, but he did know that the person that held it before All Might looked like his mother apparently. Yes, he could transfer it if he wanted to. No, he didn't want to. No, he wasn't going to accidentally give it to Shoto by kissing him. That question left him very red in the face, and he didn't have to look to know that the other boy was red too. No, he didn't seek out All Might, he just was sort of at the right place at the right time. That's so lucky though, Mina said excitedly at that. To think of the #1 hero choosing you. Izuku looked down in thought. He used to think the same thing. That it was all luck, and he had almost nothing to do with it. Some of it definitely was luck, but a lot of it was on him too. He told them just as much, not really going into detail, but still getting the point across. All Might help me realize that I really did put in a lot of work into being able to handle his power. I trained pretty much ruthlessly for almost a year, and I still could hardly handle it. At least my arms didn't fly off. Man, no wonder you broke all your bones, Kirishima said with a low whistle. Your arms flying off makes what you did during the sports festival sound tame. Yeah, that was pretty intense. He glanced at Shoto, who seemed to be looking down guiltily. And I would do it again if it meant you would still use your fire. Wait, someone said quietly, why didn't he use? I have a question, Sue said, unknowingly cutting off whoever already talking. Izuku could feel Shoto relax beside him, glad that that wasn't about to come up. Yeah, ask away, he said a bit absent-mindedly, still a bit worried about that particular topic being breached. What was your quirk before One for All, Ribbit? Did it go away, or did it somehow combine with All Might's? One question not asked, but one that might have been worse in its place, definitely worse for Izuku at least. Well, better him than Shoto, he supposed. He almost shot a hand to his mouth to stop himself, but the quirk was too fast. I didn't have one. I was quirkless. And just like that, the tension in the air was back in full force, almost worse than before. Actually, scratch that, definitely worse than before. Izuku forced himself to not hyperventilate. So what if they knew he was part of the slowly dwindling minority of people? So what if they knew he was powerless most of his life? So what if his classmates knew he had been seen as worthless? I was really hoping no one would bring that up, he couldn't help but say as everyone either stared at him or very pointedly avoided his gaze. I'm not sure how you guys'll see me now, if I'm being honest. That was redundant to say, wasn't it? No one laughed at the joke this time, and the air was just as thick, if not thicker. I didn't know, Uraraka finally said from beside him. He had forgotten that he was still holding her and Shoto's hands. So that time you saved me? That was your first time ever using a quirk at all? He felt himself nod. He seemed to be strangely detached from his body. Whether that was good or bad, he didn't know. Yeah, I was terrified, to put it lightly, but I knew I couldn't just sit there and my body just moved on its own. Uraraka let go of his hand. He was about to ask what he had done wrong when her arms flew around him in a bone-crushing hug. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered, and was her voice a bit wet? "You're gonna be a great hero, Deku. The best." And now his eyes were definitely not dry as he hugged her back. "Thank you. And you too. You saved me right after, remember?" She giggled through her tears against his neck and just held him tighter. Quirkless people are statistically more likely to develop depression and anxiety, Ida said quietly from next to them, though it rang throughout the whole room. Izuku felt his blood run cold. They're also more likely to be bullied and not reach the age of 18 due to hate crimes and suicide. Izuku pulled away from Uraraka very slowly. "Yeah, I know." He looked at Ida, who was red in the face and had his hands clamped over his mouth. At Izuku's questioning gaze, he lowered them and spoke. "I didn't mean to say that out loud, I swear. I just..." He looked at him with something close to anguish. "I'm worried for you. You're my friend." Izuku tried his best to smile. It was probably very strained. "It's okay, Ida. It's not like everyone here didn't already know all that." And it was true. They had studied quirkless statistics in their hero courses because they needed to know how to help those who couldn't help themselves. Izuku kept his head down for most of that week. It seemed that everyone else was remembering that he's someone who always participated in class discussions, had barely spoken a word during those lessons, and the worry on their faces deepened. As if sensing the oncoming panic, Izuku waved his arms in what was hopefully a placating gesture and gave his best fake smile. "I'm fine now, guys, really. I'm happy and I have all of you guys. And a quirk, I don't know what else to ask for, really." "Now?" Shoto said quietly beside him. "Stupid truth quirk, making everything I say technically accurate," he thought bitterly, smile still on his face. "Yeah, I'm fine now." He tried to say it nonchalantly like nothing was amiss, but most of the class was definitely smarter than that. They weren't in the top hero program in the country for nothing. "Meaning you weren't okay before," Sue said after a moment of silence. She wasn't ever one to beat around the bush. "I guess you could say that," he said in defeat, smile slipping off his face, knowing this conversation was happening whether he wanted it to or not. "Did you ever try to? You know?" Shoto said from next to him, eyes very pointedly trained on the floor. He seemed to be trying very hard to keep his face blank. He never finished, but the hesitation even with the truth quirk made what he was asking clear as day. "No," Izuku said immediately. Tension left everyone's bodies at that, some of them literally releasing their held breaths. But the stress in everyone's shoulders was back, and Izuku cursed the stupid quirk for the 1,000th time. "I was definitely depressed. I didn't really have a future." He looked at his hands in his lap, closing himself off from the world as he spilled his deepest secrets, even deeper than his quirklessness. "I can't say I never thought about it." Shoto and Uraraka instantly grabbed his shaking hands tightly as soon as he said that, and he held onto them for dear life. He could feel Ida's hand on his shoulder and Sue's on his knee. He must have closed his eyes at some point, or they were too full of tears for him to see anything. "You can go to your room, Midoriya," someone said. He vaguely wondered how hard everyone was trying to stay quiet. "If you don't want to say anything else, we can all leave if you need us to." He shook his head, and he ignored his heart pounding against his ribcage. It's okay, it almost feels good to get this off my chest. I never told anybody, not even my mom. The words were pouring from his mouth now, and he wasn't sure he could stop them even if he tried. I didn't tell her about the anxiety or the bullying or the suicide baiting or the way the teachers looked at me like I was a pity project or the guilt about how my dad left, and I thought it was my fault because he didn't want a quirkless son. I never told her anything because I didn't want to burden her. He was struck with a sudden realization and his stomach dropped. And here I am now, shoving this on you guys. Don't. Uraraka lifted his chin so he was looking her dead in the eyes, the same eyes that now had several tear tracks under them. If you think for 1 second that we won't support you with everything we have, then you can suffer 19 hugs at the same time until you finally get it through that thick skull of yours. Maybe even 20 if we can rope Aizawa into it. He snorted lightly through his tears. I doubt he'd agree to anything like that. Probably not, she said with a slight smile. But I know everyone here wouldn't hesitate to throw themselves headfirst into helping you, right guys? A loud chorus of agreement rang throughout the room, as if it had been rehearsed. He looked around to see everyone giving him wide, tearful grins, and he couldn't help but smile back. But you are okay now? Ida asked him, worry ever present in his eyes. It looked like he had been crying as well, and Izuku's heart broke a little. He felt his smile slip away. Relatively, yeah, I'm much better. I still get sad sometimes for no reason, and I'm still a little anxious at times. Getting out of bed is sometimes harder than it should be, too. And being All Might's successor can be pretty stressful, I guess. I see. Ida pushed up his glasses and looked down like Izuku's weirdly specific answer was completely normal. May I ask that you inform someone if things get bad again? Or tell one of us if you are feeling that way? He felt himself nod, and tears slowly filled his eyes, but he was able to keep them from falling. If you guys want me to, I can, but I don't want to be a burden or anything. You're not. It was Shoto's turn to gently turn his head and look into his eyes. You aren't and never will be a burden. We all care about you, and we won't stop caring unless you become part of the League of Villains or something. Even then I think I'd follow you because I trust your judgment more than the Hero Commission. That got a bit of a laugh out of Izuku again, and he watched as something softened in Shoto's eyes at the sight. Noted. Please don't join them, Gyro said, sounding a bit frightened. I don't think Japan would stand a chance. Izuku looked at her in surprise, but everyone else seemed to jump on what she had said, saying he would be a terrifying force to recon with. Don't worry, that's not something I plan on doing. Trust me. He felt a bit touched, though, that they thought so highly of him. In a weird way. You're so strong, Midoriya, Momo said suddenly, and not just with your quirk. You smile every day even though you've been through all that. You really will be a great hero. More words of affirmation rang through the room, and once again Izuku couldn't contain his tears. Thanks, guys. That means a lot to me. They talked for a bit after that, but soon Izuku was yawning and struggling to keep his eyes open. He only went up to bed at the insistence of his friends because they knew he was coming down from an adrenaline high. Who knew spilling your guts could be so tiring? He also told them all he would find going up by himself, and that it wasn't even all that late, so they shouldn't trouble themselves with him. They agreed reluctantly, if only because they knew he was being honest when he said he would be fine. And he knew he would be because he knew he was going to pass out as soon as he hit the pillow. Or he would have, if there hadn't been knocking on his door as soon as he was ready to sleep. He went up to answer it and was surprised to find Shinso standing there sheepishly. Hey, I'm sorry. What? Shinso rubbed his arm awkwardly. I wanted to apologize to you for what I said a while ago. I'm sorry. Izuku was drawing a blank. I don't know what you're talking about. He winced at his own words. Sorry, that was blunt. Shinso's lip quirked upwards. It's okay. It was a while back. I mean during the sports festival when I said you didn't know what it was like to be born with nothing and how you had everything handed to you in life. He nodded slowly in realization before shrugging. It's okay, you couldn't have known. Shinso stared at him. But it's not okay. I assumed everything about you only based on what I saw in front of me. I was bitter about my own past and forgot that other people struggle too. That was a lot to unpack for sure, but Izuku did his best to keep his mouth shut of any questions. If Shinso wanted to share anything more with him, he would say something. He knew firsthand what it was like to have your secrets exposed. But still, he appreciated his words enough to smile and force himself to speak carefully. Thank you. I appreciate it really. I forgive you, but I don't really think there's much to forgive. I understand. Because he definitely did understand being envious of those born with more privilege. Shinso hummed. Thanks. They said goodnight to each other, and Izuku was on his way to his bed when another knock pierced through his room. Slightly annoyed with the fact that he wasn't able to sleep once again, he went to answer the door, but his heart melted at the sight of Shoto. I knew you were stretching the truth when you said you'd be fine, he said. I know you don't like being alone. Izuku couldn't help but smile as he let him in. Fine. You caught me, but I'm still going to bed. I'm tired too. Want to cuddle? At that his face turned beet red and Izuku swore he could see steam coming from his left side. Sure, he said with a little laugh, face also red. They got into bed together, and it was the most comfortable Izuku had been in weeks. I like you like this. Is that bad? He said once they were both settled. They both faced each other, heads next to each other and arms around each other. Shoto shook his head. I don't think so. I like me like this too. Izuku hummed, letting his eyes slip shut. It was a moment before Shoto spoke again. I'm glad you told us. I never would have known. Izuku shrugged, exhaustion trying its best to claim him. I probably would have told at least you eventually. And I meant what I said. I'm mostly fine now. Plus, it's nothing really compared to what you went through. I mean, it was different, but we had a lot of similar struggles that I didn't even know about until tonight. You didn't have a future. I had one I couldn't escape. Izuku's eyes shot open. What? Shoto had the audacity to laugh. Now you know how I felt earlier. Izuku hit him in the chest before pulling him close. That's not funny. Shoto held him tightly, but nonetheless said, it's a little funny. Nope. I won't have any of your dark humor in my bed. He pulled him closer and let himself tell the truth. I'm glad you're here. Shoto's breath hitched. I'm glad you're here too. Don't leave me, okay? I won't. Don't leave me either. I won't. Chapter 3, Bakugo Part 1. Notes. Trigger warnings for previous chapters apply to this chapter as well. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. So it turned out that it was possible to not answer direct questions. It took a lot of willpower, like when you've worked out well past your limit and you have to mentally push yourself to do one more set. It was pretty much impossible though when you weren't expecting the question, which Izuku realized during breakfast. It was a nice affair to begin with. Nobody was treating him like he was made of glass, which he greatly appreciated. Everyone was being a bit nicer to him than normal though, but he didn't really mind. It was different, much different than most people when they found out he was quirkless. Different but nice. That is, until Shinso slammed his hands on the table in front of him. I love and appreciate you. The idle chatter at the table stopped. Izuku stared at him, since his aggressive tone didn't match his words at all. What? He huffed. My stupid insomnia kept me up as usual, and mixed with how worried I was about you, I barely got any sleep. Sorry. No, not your fault. He groaned, rubbing his face with his hands. That was too much information. I was worried, but I was also up thinking about how much I appreciated you as a friend, and that I'm glad I got to know you. I was also angry all night at the people who hurt you, but that's less important. Izuku felt something warm fill his chest. Thank you. I don't think you understand how much I appreciate you saying that. You're welcome, he said, face a bit red, obviously slightly embarrassed by everything he had just said, before adding almost as an afterthought, so who did bully you? Izuku's mouth opened on its own. Tsubasa Ito, Nico Takahashi, Bakugo Katsuki. He slapped a hand over his mouth, but he was a second too late. The damage had been done. Yeah, questions asked that would catch you off guard were impossible. Everyone stared at him, and he got a strange sense of déjà vu from the day before. The eyes slowly turned to the blonde sitting at the table who was glaring at the food in front of him like it had killed his family. Izuku felt Shoto stand up next to him, and he felt a rush of panic hit his chest. Bakugo. His voice was as cold as his ice. Do I need to punch you? Katsuki stood up abruptly and started to march around the table. Let's go half and half, you and me right now. I'll enjoy wiping that smirk off your face. I'd like to see you fucking try. Stop, Izuku yelled, jumping up and physically putting himself between the two. This isn't going to do anything but get you guys in trouble. Shouldn't he be in trouble though? Uraraka said, and she sounded pissed. I think bullying is grounds for expulsion here. Katsuki rounded on her too. You want a do-over of the sports festival, gravity bitch. I have a name and so does Midoriya. Wait, she didn't call him. Maybe if you had a heart you would realize that. Uraraka, you can still call me Deku, he said, unsure of how to stop the building tension. It's my hero name. Guys, calm down, Kirishima said slowly. We don't know the full story here. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you, finally. So what is the whole story? Shoto asked, still looking just as angry as he had during the sports festival. He was a bully most of our childhood, mostly verbal but a little physical at times. He flinched at his own words. Wait, that sounded bad. That's because it is bad. Ida had joined in now, clearly over his apparent shock. Midoriya, you have to realize that it's not okay. I know it wasn't okay. Of course it wasn't, but it's not like anybody ever told him to stop. The teachers and kids all practically worshipped him. He didn't know any better. That may be the case for when he was younger, but it shouldn't have been an issue past elementary school, Momo said with a glare. A moral compass would have kicked in by then. I'll fight you too, Ponytail. Kaken, you're not helping. Maybe I don't want to help myself, Deku. And yeah, they all forgot about the truth quirk right there. Izuku would remember his words later and realize and mentally kick himself 100 times over. Good, because we don't want to help you either. I can't believe we ever thought you two were just old rivals. Uraraka seemed to be out for blood at this point, getting right up in his face. Why would you ever hurt someone like Deku? Oh good, she was calling him Deku again. One problem down, a million more to go. Katsuki clicked his tongue. Lots of reasons. Maybe he was just that annoying. The slap rang throughout the room. Uraraka was breathing hard. Don't talk about him like that, she spat before walking back over to Izuku and Shoto. Izuku just gaped at her. What part of fighting will only get us in trouble did you not understand? It was way more aggressive than he would normally be, but then again, they all were. Uraraka just gave it right back to him. Are you seriously judging me right now? Why are you defending him? How bad did it even get? What was the worst he ever did? And yeah, she definitely wouldn't have asked that if she had been in her right mind, truth quirk or not, but she wasn't. Physically, breaking my arm, verbally, telling me to jump off a roof. The shock was almost tangible in the air. No one moved for a long time, or maybe it just felt like a long time. Give me one good reason I shouldn't report this to Aizawa. Ida was physically shaking, whether it was from anger or distress, Izuku didn't know. His mouth almost didn't want to work, but the quirk was actually a blessing for once. He's changed. He isn't like that anymore. And I've forgiven him already. Did he ever actually apologize? Shoto said quietly. Or are you just that kind? Izuku's mouth felt dry. No, he didn't. But this kind of behavior shouldn't be forgiven without an apology, Ida said, almost looking disappointed in his friend. But stop defending him, Shoto yelled, before regret immediately filled his face as he realized he had yelled at Izuku. I'm sorry, I just don't think this is okay. Izuku huffed. I'm feeling that from a lot of people. It's honestly kind of weird. Our teachers never cared. Wait, the school didn't even do anything? Uraraka asked incredulously. Izuku really didn't want to stir up the storm waiting in his friend's eyes, but he had no control over the words that left his mouth. Not really. The only time they did anything was when he broke my arm, and even then they just called his mom. He looked up, face red, to see everyone staring at him in what couldn't be anything other than shock. The worst seemed to be Kirishima, who shifted to look at his boyfriend with wide eyes. Is all of this true, Katsuki? He whispered. Izuku felt his heart break a little, because even though Kirishima knew full well that every single word that came from their mouths was the truth, he still didn't want to believe it. Izuku didn't want to believe it, if he was being honest. It really was horrible. Katsuki shifted. He had been staring at the ground ever since Uraraka had slapped him. Of course it is, you idiot, but when I broke his arm I was suspended for 3 days. Oh, he hadn't known that, since he had been out of school due to his arm. They were tight on money and couldn't get a good doctor for a while. And Deku, they called my mom more often than that. Kirishima flinched back at the harsh tone coming from the blonde, but still found his voice to ask, "Why?" "I didn't mean to break his arm. And it's none of your business. Or any of you for that matter." Kirishima really flinched that time. He soon backed off from the blonde altogether before looking down and grabbing his bag from his seat. "I'm going to class," he muttered. And then he left, head still down. Katsuki was definitely biting his lip, which meant he definitely wanted to say something. But of course he wasn't going to because he was Bakugo Katsuki, and Bakugo Katsuki was the most stubborn person on the planet. Stubborn enough to fight a literal truth quirk and win. Soon everyone was leaving until it was just Izuku, Shoto, and Katsuki, who still hadn't moved. "Are you coming?" Shoto asked, looking between the two. "Yeah, but can I have a minute alone with Kaken?" Shoto sighed like he knew this was coming. "Fine. This doesn't mean I'm happy with your decision." Ouch. Once they were alone, Katsuki finally stopped biting his lip. "Don't you dare apologize, nerd. It was going to come out. You can't keep anything under wraps." Izuku rolled his eyes. "We should start walking now so we're not late." Katsuki moved to grab his things, but he didn't say anything else as he started walking out the door. Izuku huffed in exasperation before rushing to follow him. "If you want them to forgive you, you're going to have to actually talk to them." "You can't force me to talk, and this dumb quirk can't either." "That doesn't mean you shouldn't talk to them." Izuku got in front of him and started walking backwards, but of course Katsuki was avoiding his gaze. "Don't you want Kirishima to understand?" He exhaled almost in a way that could have been a laugh. "You say that like you understand." Izuku rolled his eyes again. "I understand more than you think. Associating with me would make you look weak. And you hate being weak." He almost laughed again. It was a moment before he spoke. "And what makes you think the others will believe you? And don't say anything about this stupid quirk. You can say things that you think are true, but are completely false, like when Kaminari said that the bushes in the front lawn were poisonous." "That is true," Izuku said with a snort. "And they'll believe me because you're gonna back me up." "What did I say just now about thinking things are true?" "Ha ha. But seriously, if we both tell them the same story, they'll believe us. I'll tell them about how I wouldn't leave you alone, and you just had way too much pent-up aggression for a 5-year-old. I was almost a stalker, for crying out loud." "A stalker?" he asked, almost looking like he was about to start laughing hysterically. "Literally everyone followed me around. We were fucking children." "Did everyone else take notes on you, Quirk, though?" "You were just trying to practice your analysis. It's not like you felt like training physically would help you at all, since everyone told you how weak you always would be." "I guess, but I could have at least picked up some weights," Izuku said quietly. "Sometimes I wonder if I was even serious about being a hero back then." "Of course you were serious," Katsuki yelled, surprising him. "You were just using that big brain of yours instead of your weak little body, even if I never realized it. You even told me that was the reason you could help me from that stupid sludge villain. And don't act like you didn't drop everything to train your ass off with all might. You're literally the opposite of lazy." "So you didn't mind my notes on you?" he genuinely asked, because for some reason that stuck out to him the most he had been the one to destroy his notebook after all. "I mean, it was a little weird, but you've always been weird, and you love quirks. That, and you just really admired me. I admire you too now. I'm glad we're friends again." Katsuki said these words almost absent-mindedly, then turned bright red. Izuku definitely wasn't close to tears. Nope. He did his best to lighten the mood, knowing his friend was now majorly uncomfortable, even if he was telling the truth. The blonde never really did the whole emotions thing. "It's a good thing I ate that strand of hair then, isn't it?" Katsuki let out a bark of laughter. Whatever you say, Deku. And then, I know you already told me, but I just want to know for sure. You never looked down on me, did you? Izuku casually wiped at his eyes. Oh, course not, Kaiken. You were my best friend. Katsuki turned away with suspiciously wet eyes. Thanks, nerd. They arrived to homeroom just in time, and they noticed how everyone stiffened when they walked in together. Aizawa most definitely noticed, but didn't say anything, and for that Izuku was grateful. They really didn't need a mass confrontation right now. Alright, class, for today's hero training you'll be working in pairs. You pick, I don't care. All Might is waiting for you at ground beta, pick your partners before you arrive. Good luck, he said before promptly falling asleep. As everyone started pairing off, Izuku noticed one very clear thing. Everyone was avoiding Katsuki, so he turned to him and loudly said with a big smile, Hey Kaiken, wanna be partners? A lot of the chatter ceased, and heads whipped around to look at the two of them. TCH, sure I guess. Izuku grinned even wider. Great. Kirishima, do you want to be my partner? Shoto asked, staring Izuku dead in the eyes. Izuku could feel his heart start to break into a million pieces, but he just kept smiling, and maybe bit his tongue to keep from speaking too. Sure man, the redhead said, far less enthusiastic than normal. He looked over at Katsuki, who just turned his head away. Something hardened in Kirishima's eyes, and it had nothing to do with his quirk. Let's win this. Izuku saw Katsuki stand up next to him before getting right into his line of sight, looking him square in the face. I'm only gonna say this once, nerd. We're winning this thing, or I'm gonna metaphorically blast your face off. Even with the added, metaphorically, several people gasped at Katsuki's sudden words of aggression and looked very worried for Izuku's safety. Like he was still a fragile, quirkless middle schooler. Izuku just smirked and stood up, eager to prove them wrong. I'm counting on it. They ended up winning the exercise. No surprise there. Everyone grudgingly congratulated them, meaning they very clearly stated that they were still very upset after their words of good sportsmanship. Fuck all of you except Deku and shitty hair, Katsuki had said before heading back to the dorms alone. Izuku sighed for what had to be the 100th time that day before walking over to his friends. He seems ticked. He also doesn't want to defend himself to you guys. Uraraka turned and started walking away. I don't care if he defends himself or not. I'm not forgiving him. And with that she was gone. Izuku looked back at Ida and Shoto. Are you guys gonna leave me too? And maybe this quirk was making him way blunter than normal, but he couldn't bring himself to care. Shoto blanched. No, we're not. It's not you I'm mad at, even if I am a bit upset with your choices. Izuku opened his mouth to tell him that he could make his own decisions. Shoto meant well, but he didn't understand. Wait. Izuku's eyes widened as he realized something. He had to bite his tongue from blurting it out right then and there. It should have been obvious right from the start. He turned to Ida and spoke carefully. I'm gonna go ahead and head back with Shoto. We need to talk. Shoto looked at him almost in fear at the dreaded traditional breakup words. Izuku could hardly blame him for seeming afraid after all. He probably had a very angry expression on his face. Ida simply nodded, and soon they were on their way to the dorms, away from anyone who could potentially eavesdrop. Izuku broke the silence. He's not Endeavor. Shoto's head snapped up. What? Kaken. He's not Endeavor. Shoto scowled and looked at the ground. Izuku had hit the nail right on the head. You know I can't deny that I've been thinking about it. They both were power-hungry people that held too much over us. Why are you defending either of them? Izuku shook his head. I'm definitely not defending Endeavor. He was a grown adult that made the decision to abuse his family. Kaken was a child raised to believe he was better than everyone else in a society where I was expendable. Shoto winced at his words. You're not expendable. I was treated that way though, he said as he kicked a rock, and everyone else believed it. So for a kid with a powerful quirk to be seen as weak for even associating with me, it was clear what path he would take. That doesn't make it right. Of course it doesn't, he practically shouted. But it's different. Kaken realized his mistakes and is already trying to be better. Endeavor hurt you and your family for practically decades without a hint of remorse. Shoto glanced at him, not saying anything for a moment. Izuku was afraid he had gone too far when he felt a hand wrap around his own. "You're right," he said quietly. "I know you're right. I'm sorry, but I'm still upset with him." "It's okay," Izuku said, relief flooding his veins. "I know how hard it is to forgive the people that hurt those you care about, like a certain dumpster fire." Shoto smiled. "I like it when you call him those stupid nicknames, you know. Trash monster. Burning sulfur. Did you know that I thought burning trash was illegal, but then I met your sperm donor?" His boyfriend was openly laughing now, and Izuku didn't hesitate to pull him into a side hug as they walked. Shoto kissed the top of his head, and for a moment, everything felt right. It was the first official movie night of Class 1A's Truth Quarantine, and everyone was gathered in the common room talking animatedly about what movies they were going to choose. Well, everyone was there except a certain childhood friend of Izuku's. He couldn't take it anymore, the way they were all just pretending he wasn't there. So he stood up and made his way to the elevator, ignoring the protests from everyone else. He knocked on Katsuki's door, and when he received no answer, he just knocked harder. "What do you want?" Katsuki grumbled from inside. "You're gonna come downstairs and explain this with me," he said matter-of-factly. "And what makes you think I'm gonna do that?" "Because I'm asking you to." This is usually when I would say something sarcastic, but I can't now. So I'm just gonna say you're not funny. Izuku huffed before leaning against the door. He closed his eyes and let his mouth run, letting his emotions and the truth quirk overtake him. "I know you're sorry," he said quietly. "I don't need to hear you say the words because I know you hate feeling weak. I know you're trying to be better too. And yeah, you did some really shitty stuff, but we were kids, okay? We're still kids. I think everyone else forgot about that. We're still learning and we're gonna keep learning." No response. He almost kicked the door in frustration. "I know you better than anyone here, Kaken, even Kirishima. I know you don't want to admit you were wrong in front of everyone, but you've got to do it eventually, or it's gonna eat you alive." "What makes you think all that?" Katsuki asked. His voice sounded slightly choked. "Well, for one, I know you can't stand not having Kirishima around, even if you won't admit it. And the rest of your friends, you care about what they think of you, no matter how much you pretend otherwise." No sound was coming from behind him. Maybe he should try picking the lock. He suddenly fell back as the door was opened, and he would have fallen right into Katsuki if he hadn't caught him and pushed him off. "Why were you leaning on my door?" "Honestly, I thought it would take way longer to convince you." His friend snorted. "Of course you did." When the elevator doors slid open to the common room, chatter seemed to cease. Izuku realized that everyone seemed to be staring at him a lot lately. "Look," he said as he and his friend left the elevator. "I know you're mad at Kaken, and for good reason. Give us a chance to explain our relationship, okay? It's gotten better. I promise." Nobody made a move to say anything, and Izuku watched as they all made questioning eye contact with each other. He met Shoto's eyes, and he saw him give a slight nod and smile. He sighed in relief, glad to have him on their side since he had talked to him earlier. Izuku wondered if his boyfriend had talked to the others while he was upstairs. "Promises are kind of redundant right now," Jiro deadpanned when no one else spoke. "I guess you're right," he said, glad that that was the only protest. "So, can we do this?" He waited for them all to nod as he and Katsuki sat down, and he looked down at the ground with a sheepish smile. "I guess we should start at the beginning." And with that, Izuku began to tell the story of two childhood friends born into a society that valued strength over kindness, about how his classmates had all learned about his quirklessness and immediately turned their backs on him, about a horrible environment that pushed one boy down while raising the other one up, and how one of the boys thought the other was looking down on him and retaliated. "I know it was wrong of him, but I can't be all that mad at him, can I? He was just like every other kid in that class. Our teachers pretty much encouraged the bullying from kindergarten up. I was always the instigator for the fights on official reports." "But that's ridiculous," Ida exclaimed. "How could the teachers lie on forms like that?" "We didn't all grow up rich glasses," Katsuki cut in. "We were in a poor neighborhood. The school was prejudiced and fucking horrible." Everyone seemed surprised to hear Katsuki speak that way about the place that raised them, if only because it backed up what Izuku was saying. I want to hear you apologize, Uraraka suddenly hissed. I get it. Our society sucks and you thought he was looking down on you. But that doesn't excuse the years of abuse you put him through. I know it doesn't excuse it, Katsuki hissed right back. I'm damn well aware of that, and it's not even like that was the only reason I did it. I have so many excuses I could use, but I'm not going to. I was a shitty person. Can't we leave it at that? I still think an apology is in order, Shoto muttered. Guys, Izuku said slowly, I don't need to actually hear him say it. It's okay. He hates apologizing, alright? It makes him feel weak. Don't go telling them that, stupid nerd. Well, it does, so I'm not gonna let them hold that over your head. I'm interested in the other reasons you bullied him, Momo said abruptly, crossing her arms. And don't say something like, he was annoying, because that is simply unacceptable. I just said that to get you guys off my back earlier. He was pretty annoying though, and wouldn't leave me alone about my quirk. Hey, what the fuck happened to no asking questions without explicit permission? I came up with that, Kaminari whispered excitedly to himself. But you're right, Izuku said with a sad smile. I really didn't leave you alone about your quirk. I probably should have given you some space. So what other reasons were there? Kirishima said, looking down like he had been all day. I want to understand. Everyone else turned to look at Katsuki, interested but obviously apprehensive about what he was going to say. Honestly, Izuku felt the exact same way. What was he going to say? Katsuki shifted, looking down at the floor uncomfortably. It was a long time before he spoke. Part of the reason was because my quirk makes me have a low blood pressure, and my body has to constantly pump me with adrenaline to keep me conscious. I had a lot of anger and nowhere to put it. Izuku blanched back in shock. After all that had happened, that was one of the reasons why Katsuki was so cruel to him, because he literally had to be angry to stay conscious. Katsuki looked just as unnerved by his confession as Izuku was, if a bit flustered as did everyone else. It was like everything they knew about the fiery boy finally made sense. Of course, he was always fired up. If he wasn't, he might collapse or worse. Kaken, I had no idea, he said quietly. Katsuki just huffed out something that was almost a laugh, but wasn't quite there. Yeah, well, I'm surprised with all that note-taking you did on my quirk. Now it was Izuku's turn to be flustered. Yeah, he said with a small laugh. I guess that I should have picked up on that. Yeah, Katsuki said somewhat awkwardly. And then, I'm sorry. Izuku nearly fell out of his chair. Kaken. I said sorry, all right. I'm not saying it again. Katsuki looked down, suddenly interested in his shoes. I might as well make the most of this damn truth quirk and say this before I lose my nerve. I never should have treated you like that, and I know my stupid anger isn't an excuse or anything. It was wrong. And before any of you extras say anything, he said with a glare, I absolutely know that Deku is way too forgiving for his own good. He looked back at Izuku. So yeah, I'm sorry. He said it through somewhat gritted teeth, and a scowl was set on his face, and he was glaring daggers at him now, but he meant it. This was 100% real. He was sorry for what he had done to him, and Izuku got the apology he never thought he would get, so. Thank you so much, Izuku said through the lump in his throat. I think you know I've forgiven you. Katsuki clicked his tongue and looked away, but not before rolling his eyes in exasperation. Of course you have, you idiot. Chapter 4, Conversations. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. The movie night went pretty well after all that. The anger that had been harshly directed at Katsuki all day was just about gone after his apology, for which Izuku was so glad. He knew Katsuki was a better person now, and he was glad his classmates could see it too. He was growing and learning to be the hero he had always wanted to be, which was beautiful and amazing, and it made Izuku wondrously happy. He hoped it made everyone else happy too. The blonde seemed to be nonchalant about this development, but Izuku could see the relief in his eyes as Kirishima moved over to let him sit down. And no, Izuku didn't mean to overhear on the way to his seat, but he didn't have almost 20 hero journals because of his lack of eavesdropping skills. I'm sorry for hurting you, Katsuki muttered. 2 apologies in one day? This was the proof he had changed, honestly. Izuku felt himself smile at the thought. Thankfully at this point no one else seemed to be listening, too caught up in movie picking again. I understand if you don't want to be with someone like me. I know you're better now, Kirishima said with what sounded like a frown. Izuku was in his seat now, which was only a few seats away from them, so he could still hear everything. Maybe he shouldn't be listening. Can we talk about this later? Katsuki grunted. Alone? Yeah, of course. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. He did not need Katsuki mad at him for that one. So, what are we watching first? Kirishima asked, putting an arm around his boyfriend. Izuku hid a smile behind his hand as he saw the blonde lean against him with a well-hidden blush. Something classic, Mina said with vigor. Like Disney or DreamWorks. I haven't seen any of those, Shinso said. I didn't watch many movies growing up. What? Kaminari yelled incredulously. Were the people that raised you monsters? Well, actually, we have to watch a classic then, Uraraka exclaimed. Like Tangled or How to Train Your Dragon. That one's a good one, Sue said. My brothers and sisters both like the one without the teeth. His name is Toothless, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have teeth, Izuku said with a small frown, slightly upset with his friends not knowing these simple facts. I'm confused. Shoto looked at him with a bewildered expression. His name is Toothless, but he has teeth? Not you too, he groaned. It's official, Mina said. We're watching it. Anyone who objects speak now or forever hold your peace. Wait, Kaminari said. Which movie? Were you not paying attention? Katsuki said. You were just part of this conversation. I zoned out, I guess, Kaminari said with a sheepish grin. Mina waved her arms in the air. Everyone shut up, I'm playing it. Movie time, no talking. But the problem was that the people who hadn't seen this particular movie, Shoto, Shinsu, Tsu, and a few others would normally not talk because they were either socially awkward or too considerate of others. But because of the truth quirk, Izuku found himself answering his boyfriend's whispered questions every few minutes, and he could hear others doing so for the others as well. Hey Tsu, someone asked at one point, if your brothers and sisters watch this, why haven't you seen it? They're a lot younger than me, she said, not taking her eyes off the screen. I usually put the movie on for them while I did stuff around the house. My parents both worked a lot, so I was in charge of the housework and taking care of my siblings. It was hard. Izuku looked over at his friend, who looked slightly red in the face as to what she had just said. That's really admirable, he said after a moment. I'm glad your parents had someone they could trust to do that for them. Everyone else was looking at her now too, and someone had paused the movie. Do you want to talk about it? Uraraka asked softly from next to her, putting a hand on her arm. Itsu shook her head. Not really. I mean, sometimes it was stressful. But my brother is old enough to look after the rest of them now that I'm here all the time. If not, I probably would have left Yua. But being a hero is your dream, Uraraka said, obviously distressed at the idea of her friend leaving. I know that, but I care more about my family than anything else. I would have figured something out. But now I have the chance to sign with a good agency and support them. Izuku watched as something began swimming in Uraraka's eyes. He knew exactly why. I'll sign with a good agency and make plenty of money. Then I'll be able to let my parents have an easy life. It felt like they were all intruding on a moment between the two of them, but no one had the heart to say anything. I know how you feel, she said, smiling sadly. I'm going to do the same thing for my parents. That's why I really wanted to become a hero in the first place. I know this probably isn't the best thing to say right now, Momo said with a slight blush, but I want to apologize for anything I may have said in the past about my family's wealth and how I take it for granted. And really, I would trade that wealth for a family like either of yours. I don't remember the last time I spoke to my mother or father outside of a scheduled appointment. Uraraka blanched back in shock. Yeah, Momo. Sorry, that was rude of me, she said with a very forced laugh. No, not that, Uraraka exclaimed, before realizing her outburst and speaking softly. I mean the thing about your parents, that's horrible. Momo shrugged like this was no different than discussing the weather, but her eyes told a different story. It's not like I have many opportunities to see them now anyway. I much prefer the company of all of you. Awa Momo, Mina squealed. We love you too. I'm glad I got to know you too, Sue said. She smiled widely as Uraraka brought her in for a hug. I'm glad I got to know all of you. I'm glad I get to be here. Hagakure and Mina both jumped up and made an almost inhuman noises of joy, joining the hug. I love you guys, they both said at the same time. Yeah, Momo. Gyro. Uraraka said sternly. Get over here. They both awkwardly joined the group of girls hugging each other, and Izuku found himself smiling. He loved the girls in their class and how close they all were, even if there weren't many of them. He almost found himself frowning, wondering if the hero course was sexist somehow, but that was a question for another time. Are we gonna keep watching the movie? Shoto whispered in his ear, or at least tried to. It was much louder than he probably meant it to be, making all of the girls' sweat drop. Sorry, Mina said. We just got caught up in the moment right there. Let's keep watching. About time, Katsuki grumbled. I want to see them crush the big dragon. It's my favorite part. The movie started playing again, but Izuku was more focused on holding in a snicker when he saw Bakugo's face turn pink from what he said. They watched a couple more movies after that, a few superhero movies from the pre-Quirk era, and man, were those fascinating to watch. He could talk about those for hours. By the end of one about, according to Shoto, a big purple guy looking for space rocks, everyone was about ready for bed. I'm gonna head on up, Ajiro said, and other people muttered their agreements. Izuku felt himself yawn. Yeah, you ready for bed, Shoto? He yawned too. Yeah. Wait, guys, Mina said in surprise. Are you sure you don't want to watch one more? We're all tired and we have school in the morning, Ida said sternly, robotically moving his arms like usual. It would be wise to try and sleep now. We'll have more movie nights, Uraraka reassured. We can watch more then. But I'm not ready to go to bed yet, she almost whined. You can stay up in your own room, Sue said, but we're tired. I'm tired too, so if I go to my room I'll fall asleep. Isn't that a good thing? Kirishima said, standing up. Katsuki grumbled something about losing his pillow and stood up too. We do have class tomorrow and it's already after midnight. It's not a good thing because then I'll have really bad nightmares just like always, she said before slapping a hand over her mouth. Everyone that had been walking away turned back around abruptly, clearly at a loss for words. Mina had nightmares. Izuku could understand nightmares. He definitely had them from all of the stuff they had been through together, but they weren't constant like she was implying hers were. All the times she had pleaded with them to stay up longer finally made sense. Come on guys, one more round. I bet you double or nothing. We can stay up a bit longer, right? If Aizawa can sleep in class, so can we. How often do you have them? Kirishima asked softly. Mina looked like she was going to start crying, but with an encouraging nod from Kirishima, she slowly lowered her hand. Almost every night, she whispered. I don't understand why. I haven't even been through as much as you guys, but no one else talks about having them. Is there something wrong with me? Of course not, Kirishima said, slowly approaching her. I have them too. I think we all do. I dream about the usage and the training camp and about Katsuki being kidnapped. Well, you went to rescue him, she said with a slight sniffle. She crossed her arms indignantly like she was mad at herself. And you all were sent to fight villains in the Ustya. I was just stuck at the front. And I bet you don't have them every night. Kirishima winced. No, I don't. They're more of a 2 or 3 times a week thing. I think we all have nightmares, Mina, Uraraka said quietly as she went up and took her friend's hand. I don't think you can go through what we have without getting any. Mina groaned, plopping back down on the couch and pulling Uraraka down with her. I guess I should have realized that, but no one else ever said anything. I thought I was going crazy or something, and I'm almost scared to go to sleep at this point. I'm just dragged back there, where you guys are all dying in front of me, and I can't do anything to stop it. Mina's head shot up and her face turned bright red. Wow, hello oversharing. She whipped around and looked right at Izuku, and he almost stepped back in surprise. Is this how you felt this whole time? Because this sucks. Izuku found himself laughing weakly. He wondered how many more people would find themselves in their position by the end of the month. Yeah, it's pretty rough. Ugh, Mina said. At least I'm not alone. But I still get them way more often, apparently. Kirishima sat down next to her and started rubbing her back. Maybe you should talk to Aizawa if they're this bad. He could get you help. We're only gonna go through more stuff as pro heroes. God, don't remind me. I have them pretty often too, Katsuki said awkwardly, surprising everyone, especially Mina, if her wide eyes and hanging jaw said anything. He sat down across from her and crossed his arms, glaring at the ground. You're not alone in this. I swear, every night that Handsy bastard stares me down like I'm still gonna join his emo boy band. It's annoying as fuck. Mina started to tear up again. I can't believe I'm complaining about my stupid nightmares when you literally got kidnapped by the League of Villains. Don't do that, Katsuki snapped. You can't compare trauma like that. Just because I went through something shitty doesn't mean you didn't. You're allowed to have feelings. Everyone looked at him like he had grown a second head. Katsuki's eye twitched. I hate this stupid Quirk. Thanks, Bakugo, Mina said with a wobbly smile. She was the only one not staring at the blonde like he had been switched with some weird clone. I appreciate that. Something in Katsuki's eyes softened. No problem, Mina. Mina mock gasped. Did everyone hear that? He said my name, not raccoon eyes. I will fight you. They ended up having a giant sleepover in the common room. Nobody really wanted to leave after all they had talked about. They stayed up late into the night, talking about everything and nothing all at the same time. The problem was that they ended up staying up way later, and they ended up sleeping in since all of their alarm clocks were in their rooms. Meaning none of them showed up for class, not even Ida, who usually had a perfect internal clock. Aizawa was so tired that morning, so when he walked into his homeroom class to see absolutely none of his students, he walked right back out. They ended up not getting into too much trouble for their late-night impromptu sleepover. Aizawa was furious at first, but when Mina stepped forward and shyly explained that they had done it all for her, something in his eyes had softened. They were definitely softer when she informed him, and everyone else, that she'd had no nightmares that night. Everyone was so relieved and thrilled, and Aizawa eventually gave permission for the girls to take turns spending the night with her from then on. That didn't stop Ada from profusely apologizing for his lack of leadership skills and whatnot, but he also defended his classmates with the fact that they couldn't have used their phones to wake themselves up since they didn't have them anymore. Aizawa simply rolled his eyes, but not without hiding a smile beneath his capture weapon. It was later during their hero training where Izuku screwed up. He liked to think it wasn't his fault. They were all tired from their lack of sleep the night before, so everyone was a little off. Even Katsuki was sloppy with his movements as they attempted to save dummies from a building set to collapse. Of course, Izuku being himself, he was so worried about the hostages that he didn't notice everyone else was out of the building and it had already begun to collapse. Because of course it would actually collapse because Yua didn't know the meaning of the word subtle. He woke up in a hospital bed. This much he was used to. He was also used to his friends at his side asking him worried questions about how he was feeling, and he was used to lying to them about how he felt fine. What he wasn't used to was the stupid truth Quirk. I'm really tired and sore, he said when Uraraka asked him how he was doing. He immediately groaned in frustration. I hate this. I don't, Shoto said nonchalantly, picking at his nails. You can't brush us off anymore. It must be a nightmare for you though. Midoriya, you need to be more careful, Ida said from his side. He looked tenser than usual. As I've said before, when you end up in situations like this, it only reminds me of my brother and how I don't want you to have the same fate. Izuku stared at him. He remembered Ida saying something similar when Katsuki had been kidnapped, but he had thought it was only the adrenaline and drive to keep them from going that made him say it. But now, when he was pretty much fine with no impending danger. Do you think that all the time? He couldn't help but ask. Are you really that worried about me? Of course I am, Ida said. You've become like a brother to me. Izuku smiled, trying not to let tears form in his eyes. And of course he was failing, as per usual. You too. The day continued on, as did the rest of the week. But it wasn't quite normal. The truth Quirk was still there, so everything was slightly to the left. Not everything that came out of their mouths was some world-altering secret. They blurted out their random thoughts while talking to each other, and it made for some very Interesting conversations. So wait, you've never killed anyone in Among Us? Uraraka asked with a frown. Izuku looked down sheepishly. No, I can't bring myself to. When I'm the imposter, I kinda just wander around and wait for everyone to complete their tasks. Killing them makes me feel mean. Shoto stared at him with a blush. You're too pure, you know that? You know you could beat everyone without breaking a sweat as the imposter, right? Uraraka asked. Oh yes, I'm very aware. Can I borrow your shampoo? Siro asked Kirishima, who was sitting at a table doing homework. I'm all out. No, mine's special for my hair dye. Wait, Bakugo deadpanned. You dye your hair? You guys didn't know, Mina said, sounding surprised. You can see his roots before he dyes it like every month. Mina, you knew me before I started dyeing it. That's cheating. She stuck her tongue out him. What color is your natural hair? Bakugo asked, looking at him intently. Black, he said, running his fingers through it. They blend into the red so the roots aren't all that noticeable. The blonde hummed and kept looking at him for a moment. I like your hair like this, by the way, he said, almost as an afterthought. But I'd like it any way you want it, I think. He turned bright red, and when Mina started a long, drawn-out "ah," he yelled, Shut up! You metaphorically didn't hear anything. Mina and Siro started cackling at that, and his face just turned even redder, almost matching Kirishima's hair. So let me get this straight, Aizawa said, pinching the bridge of his nose. You know that you need at least 5,000 calories a day because of your quirk? And you've known this for a long time. Yes, Momo said. And you would like to eat that much, but your parents have you on a strict diet. Yes. Aizawa looked either ready to take a nap and never wake up or go kill a man. Well, since you're in the dorms now, you're US ward, and therefore my responsibility. I'll have Lunch Rush make you a new meal plan to help ease you back onto a healthy diet. Momo looked shocked and somewhat close to tears. Thank you, sir. I'm just saying, Bakugo is the most rebellious person in our class, Kaminari argued. I don't know, he's never tried to kill someone for vigilante justice, Midoriya said. Wait, someone said. Who tried to kill someone for vigilante justice? Are you really French, Ayama? But of course, Mon Ami, why would you think otherwise? Well, wait, you like classic rock? Gyro asked, her face pink. Yeah, and rock and roll, Momo said, putting a finger to her chin. You were the one that introduced me to those genres, actually. I was raised on classical instrumental music. Gyro turned around and shouted, That's cool, before briskly walking away. Momo was left to wonder what all that was about, since she couldn't see the other girl's face turn even pinker. That didn't mean her own face wasn't flushed, though. I own 6 All Might plushies, and yeah, well, I own 20, you fucking nerd. I wish I was allowed to own an All Might plushie, Todoroki said sadly off to the side of the battle for the title of Ultimate All Might fan, and Uraraka just nodded her head in sympathy. Why don't you ever wear a tie? Kaminari asked. Bakugo looked at him oddly for a moment. I don't like things around my neck. So the opposite of a choke kink, Siro said absent-mindedly from across the room. Kirishima spit his drink everywhere. Siro looked up, fearing for his life, and rightfully so. There was a day during combat training where Shinso and Aizawa were standing next to each other with the same expression on their face. Todoroki stared with a calculating expression. His boyfriend noticed and immediately put his face in his hands. Shoto, I swear, not again. Your favorite hero's not even Japanese? Kaminari asked with a bewildered stare. Siro shook his head. Nah, mine's this really cool spider-themed hero from America. He swings around just like I do. Is that his quirk? Izuku asked. No, I think his quirk is something like Sue's. He can do anything a spider can, basically. Like stick to walls. What's his name? Kaminari asked. Siro smiled widely. Peter Man. Of course I care about all of you, Bakugo yelled from the kitchen at his stupid squad. Why else would I make you dinner and help you study when you clearly don't take the classes seriously? Bakubro, Kaminari yelled. That means so much. Did you guys actually think I hated you or some shit? I mean, not really, Mina said. But you are pretty aggressive. That's just who I am, he said, a bit softer than his normal anger-filled tone. I might not be the best at showing it, but I care. He proceeded to yell at them when they all immediately tackled him in a group hug, and they only let go when he said, "You're gonna make me burn the chicken, idiots." Kyoka was really starting to not like this quirk. It made her blurt out the most ridiculous things at the stupidest times, made Kaminari actually make sense for once, and had caused her to almost blurt her feelings out to her crush. Yeah, Momo or Momo, were they close enough for that? Had admitted her favorite music genres earlier, and that would have set her mouth off if it hadn't been for her running as quickly as she could in the other direction. She had probably left the other girl so confused. Good job, Truth Quirk. Maybe this wouldn't end badly. After all, Bakugo and Kirishima were just fine. Well, aside from Bakugo's entire past being brought to light. Yeah, Kyoka would like to avoid something like that. Midoriya and Todoroki had also started dating, right? They were happy. Aside from Midoriya later revealing that he had All Might's quirk and had been quirkless and therefore ruthlessly bullied and depressed. You know, usual conversation material. It wasn't like confessing was a prerequisite to spilling your guts, but it didn't have a good track record. Of course, Mina and Sue had also shared their own problems, but she didn't want to risk it. But Kyoka didn't have any baggage like that, right? Nothing that could accidentally come to light if she were to confess, either to Momo or the class, right? The closest thing she could think of would be her dad's drinking problem, but even then it had always been minor, and ever since she got into hero school he had been doing his best to get better, and had now been clean for months. If anything, she was really proud of him. Her insecurities about being a hero, that could come out too, she supposed, but it wasn't like she doubted herself all the time. She was pretty sure everyone, with maybe the exception of Bakugo, was insecure at times about their future as heroes. With such a competitive job market, it was to be expected, and she didn't really think it would make her cry in front of everyone or anything. Oh, who was she kidding? The only reason she was really thinking about all this was to distract herself from the real reason she didn't want to confess Momo didn't like her back. Why else would she not have confessed her undying love to her yet? Maybe Kyoka was being a tiny bit dramatic. Of course, she hadn't confessed either, so this whole thing was a mess. All of these thoughts scrambled her brain as the first week with the Truth Quirk passed. She was terrified that her thoughts would blurt right out of her mouth when she was least expecting it. Thankfully, her usual calm demeanor kept anyone from asking her questions of the emotional type, so at least she had that going for her. However, Momo wasn't part of her typical friend group, so she wasn't prepared for her to approach her that Thursday afternoon in the hallway. "Are you avoiding me?" Momo had asked her, her voice small and sad. It was something she never would have asked normally. "Did I do something to offend you?" "No, I just like you more than a friend, and these feelings are making me nervous around you," she said. And immediately died inside before bolting. And now here she was, sitting in her room, trying to do her homework as she tried not to think about how much she had just screwed herself over. She really had to go and say that like a complete moron. She knew her life was basically over. That is, before there was a knock at her door. Actually, scratch that, her life was definitely over now. She held in a groan as she stood from her desk and made her way to the door. And promptly froze when she saw her standing there. "Momo?" Kyoka said on instinct before turning bright red. "Wait, yeah, Momo." "It's okay," she said, face pink. "Can I call you Kyoka?" It was so sudden and unexpected that she didn't even notice the deepening of both their blushes. Of course. She felt like her brain was melting as they both stood there staring. Neither said anything for the longest time, but neither of them seemed to take any notice. "Do you want to come in?" Kyoka finally said, brain still trudging through molasses as she opened the door wider and started to head to her desk. "I can play us some I Love You." Kyoka was pretty sure she got whiplash from how fast she turned around. What? If anything, her exclamation just made Momo more nervous. "Oh, that was such an inappropriate thing to say. I'm so sorry." "It's okay," she said, finally finding her voice. And now that she had found it, the Truth Quirk made her unable to stop. "I love you too." The dark-haired girl looked at her with wide eyes. Well, she cleared her throat, trying to sound like she had everything under control. Kyoka found it endearing. "I'm glad that's settled." She let out a startled yelp as Kyoka pulled her in for a tight hug. "I'm so happy right now," she couldn't help but say before nuzzling her face into the other's neck. Like, unbelievably happy. "Me too," Momo said with a giggle that made it obvious that she was drunk on love. "I was so upset when you ran away from me earlier because I didn't get to tell you that I felt the same." Kyoka felt a pang of guilt. "I'm so sorry." "No, I'm sorry," she said, pulling away and looking straight into her eyes. Kyoka felt unbelievably vulnerable and loved every moment of it. "For making you feel like I didn't feel the same. And it doesn't matter anymore. I had to wait like an hour. So what?" It was Kyoka's turn to laugh lightly. She took Momo's hand and kissed her knuckles. "Guess we have one more couple to announce to the class, huh?" Momo actually looked sheepish at that. "Actually, I might have told them I was coming up to confess, and that you had already confessed to me." Kyoka leaned back her head and groaned, making the other girl, was she her girlfriend now, laugh in earnest. "Of course you did." And she couldn't help but add, "Can I kiss you?" Momo's face turned red, and Kyoka started to instantly regret asking, but Momo answered her before she could say anything else. And Momo didn't answer with words, which was perfectly fine in Kyoka's opinion. She smiled against the girl's lips and thought that maybe this truth quirk wasn't so bad after all. Chapter 5, Useless. Notes. TW and End notes. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Kirishima as well as everyone else had gotten pretty used to the truth quirk by the end of the first week. Yeah, it was still pretty weird when they couldn't stop their mouths from opening half the time, but really it wasn't as bad as they thought it was going to be. It was only the first few days that everyone had been sharing their deepest, darkest secrets. Hopefully that was over. Kirishima had been scared when the topic of dyeing his hair had come up, but he had forced himself not to say anything. Katsuki's compliments on his hair certainly hadn't helped distract him, of course not. He had also been scared Mina would say something, but she didn't. She simply poked fun at him just like she always did. Maybe she didn't realize how low his self-confidence had really been in middle school. But he was better now. Right? "Hey guys, who do you think has the coolest quirk?" Kaminari asked the boys in the locker room that Friday after school was over. They had been doing specialized quirk exercises that day, so of course someone was going to ask. Someone almost always did, but since they couldn't lie, it was a more weighted question. Like, mine could be so cool if I could actually control it half the time. "Well, in terms of control, I think Kaken wins," Midoriya said, causing the boy in question to smirk triumphantly. "He's insanely talented." "What about Todoroki?" Kirishima asked. Katsuki snapped around and shot him a murderous look. "Eh? You think icy hot is better than me?" Kirishima waved his hands frantically to calm the boy down. "No, that's not what I meant at all. I just find it weird that he wouldn't pick his own boyfriend, that's all. You're both super strong." "Of course I think Shoto's strong," Midoriya said with a blush. "I've just looked up to Kaken's strength my whole life, so I'm a little biased. Plus I was talking about control, and no offense Sho, but you've still got to work on your left side." Todoroki nodded, face as blank as ever. "I'm aware." Midoriya turned red when the words he had just said registered. "That sounded so rude, I'm so sorry." "Don't worry, it's fine." Todoroki gave him one of his rare smiles. "I love your analysis, even if it's about me." "You two are disgusting," Katsuki said. "Don't act like you and Kirishima aren't the exact same way," Joe said. "You hang on him every movie night, and then some." "I know training is over, but I can still kick your ass, Tail Boy." "It's Tail Man." "I know, but my nickname's better. Anyway, it doesn't matter. My quirk is the best and Ai's is right after mine." "Of course you would pick your boyfriend," Kaminari teased. "I don't think so," Kirishima said quietly, making everyone look at him. He tried not to crumple under their gaze, but kept on talking regardless of how much he wanted to shut up. "Katsuki would be first, and I think Todoroki would be next, then Midoriya, compared to the start of the year at least, then Ida." "But your quirk has a wide variety of uses," Ida said with certainty. "I don't think Bakugo was incorrect to state that you have some of the best control of your quirk in this room." "Yeah, and it's a good thing we're not including the girls." Kaminari shivered like he was thinking of something frightening. "Yeah, Momo would win hands down." That's fair, Todoroki said. But yeah, Kirishima, your quirk is very applicable. But it's not all that heroic or helpful, he said, hardening his hand for a moment before staring at his regular skin. Neither am I, for that matter. My quirk and my personality aren't all that flashy. I don't think I'll be that good of a hero. Under all the hardening, I'm pretty useless. Kirishima's head snapped up after his unprompted words registered in his mind. Crap. I'm leaving. And without even looking at the others, that's exactly what he did, as fast as he possibly could. How stupid am I? He thought to himself. I mean, really. I didn't even put my shirt back on before leaving the locker room, he thought as he yanked a random t-shirt over his head and changed into pajama pants. Because damn it, he might have been sad, but he wasn't about to be sad and uncomfortable at the same time. Maybe he was spending too much time with Mina. He thought he was more self-confident compared to middle school, and he was right. He had said, I don't think I'll be a very good hero, and not, I don't think I can be a hero at all. That was an improvement. He realized then that this quirk didn't stop you from lying to yourself. He managed to escape the locker room without anyone following and get to the dorms before everyone else did, so he was able to escape to his room and hide there for what would hopefully be the rest of the night. He did his best to distract himself, doing homework that wasn't due until that Monday. At least he tried doing the homework. He stared at the page in front of him and tried not think about what his words earlier meant, but to no avail. He had thought that during that stupid raid he had overcome something inside of himself and become more of a man, but it was more of a band-aid over a bullet wound. Strip away his hardening, and he was still just a weak kid. When the moment to save someone came, he didn't know if he would charge in head first or freeze. He stared at that stupid piece of paper for so long that he didn't realize he had skipped dinner. He hoped that the girls didn't know about what he had said by now, but he knew that was wishful thinking. Even if the others hadn't wanted to share, one question would have been all it took to get them to spill. And considering his absence, it was obvious they would ask. What would Mina have told them if she found out? Would she tell them about how he dyed his hair to stand out more, or that he froze when the lives of their former classmates were on the line? A knock at his door startled him out of his thoughts. He ignored it at first, but then they knocked again 5 times louder. He had one guess as to who that could be. He reluctantly opened the door. Hey. You skipped dinner. Katsuki's voice was quiet, so unlike his usual tone. Everyone was worried about you. That definitely wasn't something he would say normally, so Kirishima couldn't help but smirk. Definitely not to distract himself from his growing panic, never. It's nice to see you so caring. He watched the blonde's cheeks heat up and almost regretted his words. Well, it's not easy for me to be all nice and shit. You and all the extras are so good at it. Kirishima's jaw dropped at the admission. Here he was, concerned about his secrets getting out, and his boyfriend was spilling his guts to him at his doorway. They still hadn't even spoken about what happened earlier in the week. Kirishima had been waiting for the blonde to bring it up first, but based on how uncomfortable he looked now, he obviously didn't want to talk about it. So are you here to force me to eat? Kirishima asked, making an extreme effort to change the topic. Katsuki looked at him almost gratefully before shooting him a glare. That's exactly what I'm doing, you idiot. We're also doing another movie night tonight. We'll probably watch even more too since it's Friday. They sent me to get you. Kirishima began to turn around to put his stuff away. Well, let me just… Do you really think all that? Katsuki asked with a low voice. His eyes were downcast and his mouth was set in a grim line. All that stuff you said in the locker room. Do you really believe it? Yeah. Kirishima couldn't stop the words from coming out if he tried. He could feel his heart pounding as if it were trying to escape his chest. I couldn't say it if I didn't think it. Let's just go downstairs, he said, attempting to push past him through the doorway. I don't want to talk about it. You know everyone else is going to hound you too, Katsuki said, putting a hand on his chest to stop him. I might be bad at confrontation, but there are people down there that will grill you until you spill just about everything. Kirishima remembered everyone doing just that to Katsuki earlier that week, and he couldn't help but wince. Yeah, you're right about that. So, talk to me. The blonde almost looked constipated, and it was almost funny. I'm so bad at this, but I'm… I'm trying, okay? And I appreciate it, Kirishima said as he grabbed the other's hand off his chest and started pulling him down the hallway to the elevator. I don't really know what to say though. I used to be really self-depreciating and I'm better now, but I'm still not all that self-confident. Is that what you want to hear? It came out a lot harsher than he meant it to, and he felt horrible since Katsuki really was trying and he just threw attitude back in his face, but thankfully his boyfriend was fluent in the language of bitterness. I guess, but I want to know how I can help. I care about you. He almost gagged at his own words. This Quirk, I swear to All Might himself, if this Quirk makes me sound all sweet and shit one more time. Kirishima laughed. I happen to like you soft. That is gross. They walked out of the elevator without too much of a shock wave going through the room, since they were all focused on picking movies again, but Kirishima definitely noticed heads turn their way when the doors opened, to which he awkwardly waved before following Katsuki into the kitchen. I saved some noodles for you, he said as he shoved a plate into his hands. I had Sato heat them up so they should be good to eat. There's chicken in there too. Kirishima felt his mouth water at the sight. It was your night to cook, right? Katsuki smirked. You know it. I love you, he took a bite. And you're cooking, he said through a mouthful of food so it sounded like our uki. And you said Izuku and I were bad, Todoroki deadpanned from the table. Shut your trap, icy hot. You're all disgustingly sweet, Kaminari said with a wide smile as he poked his head around the corner. We're starting the movies now. For every other movie night before it had been Katsuki tucked into Kirishima's side. That's just how it happened, he supposed, but tonight it was the other way around. The blonde put his arm around him in a way that made him feel warm and safe. If this was how Katsuki had been feeling all week, he couldn't help but feel a tiny bit jealous. He hoped they could just enjoy the movies and nothing about what he had said earlier would come up, but that was about as likely as Bakugo admitting to being bad at fighting. It was inevitable, really. Put 20 truth-prone teenagers in a room, and one of them was bound to say something eventually. Kirishima just wished he had a bit more time to catch his breath before all hell broke loose. And of course, it was Mina that spoke first. It was during the credits of the second movie. By this point they were getting more tired, so the talking between scenes and such had gone down. It lured him into a false sense of security because of course it did. He didn't even notice her pause the movie, too busy sleepily tracing the veins on Katsuki's arm. Kirishima, she said quietly, do you really think you won't be a good hero? He was wide awake now, and the pounding in his chest was back in full force as he turned to look at her, practically frozen. I don't know, he answered honestly. Sometimes I feel like I will be, like when I do well during training and in class. That's not a real answer, Katsuki said gruffly. Kirishima felt his cheeks heat up. The Quirk let me say it, so of course it is. Not necessarily, Gyro said with a frown. We can say half-truths if we try hard enough. And I think you're trying very, very hard. She punctuated that last part with a glare in his direction, and he found himself struggling to breathe for a moment. Was it really hot in here, or was it just him? Guys, give him some space, Kaminari said. I thought we all agreed to not ask questions unless the person said it was okay. It's all right, Kirishima said with a wave of his hand. He could do this. Communication was important, and it took a lot of guts, right? He had to be able to do this. I don't want to wimp out or anything. This isn't about you wimping out, Kirishima, Mina said, and she sounded close to tears. Since when had that happened? This is about if you feel comfortable talking to us about all this. He looked down at the ground for a moment before giving her a small smile. I guess you're right. And I am. Comfortable, I mean. He rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. It's like Midoriya said a few days ago. I trust you guys like a second family. He felt Katsuki's arm tighten around him, almost protectively. Good, the blonde said. We wouldn't let you deal with this on your own anyway. Kirishima chuckled in spite of himself. I figured as much. Did this start in middle school? Mina asked. When that monster almost attacked my friends? He looked at his hands and wrung them together awkwardly. I mean, yeah, back then my quirk was super weak anyway, but I thought my spirit could make up for it. But then that happened and I froze. Something horrible could have happened if you hadn't stepped in and I would have just been a helpless bystander. He didn't need to look up to know that everyone's gazes were drilling into his head. It was obvious that Mina had told them about it earlier, and he wondered if they thought he was a coward yet. "I've frozen before," Midoriya said suddenly. Kirishima looked up at him with wide eyes. "Back when I didn't have a quirk, this giant sludge monster was going to attack me and I didn't move in time. I would have died if All Might hadn't saved me." "That thing attacked you too?" Katsuki suddenly yelled, now at the edge of his seat and gripping his armrest tightly. The others looked between the two rivals in confusion. Midoriya just shrugged. "Yeah, All Might caught him actually, but because of me he got away and was able to attack you." His head then shot up and he slammed his hands over his mouth. Kirishima looked up at Katsuki, who was just staring at Midoriya with wide eyes. "You blame yourself for me getting attacked, don't you? It wasn't a question." "Hey!" Uraraka exclaimed. "It wasn't his fault! How dare you?" "I didn't say I blamed him, pink cheeks, I just said he did." "You don't blame me?" Midoriya whispered, slowly lowering his hands. He looked genuinely shocked, and honestly, with Katsuki's temper Kirishima could hardly blame him. Katsuki clicked his tongue. "Of course not. I mean, you probably did something stupid, but if All Might caught him, then it should have been his responsibility to not let him go." Midoriya looked down, seemingly embarrassed. "I guess you're right." "But you didn't freeze later that day," Kirishima found himself saying, causing everyone to turn to him in confusion. "It was all over the news. Some kid got attacked by a sludge monster, and another kid rushed in to save him. That was you, right?" "Yeah, that was me and Kaken," Midoriya said, looking down. "My feet literally moved on their own. All the heroes yelled at me for being stupid, except All Might. That's when he offered me his quirk." He looked up at Kirishima with a red face. "That wasn't helpful, was it?" "No, not really." He winced at his words. "This stupid quirk makes me sound so rude. I hate it." "We all feel that way," Gyro said with a smirk, "except for Bakugo." Katsuki started yelling some sort of profanities at her, but Kirishima wasn't really listening. When Midoriya had been faced with a life-or-death situation in middle school, he had acted without even thinking. He himself had pleaded with his own body to move, but nothing had worked. He was a coward, and he was never meant to be a hero like the rest of his classmates, he was sure of it. "That's not what I'm saying at all," Midoriya yelled almost angrily, but he mostly just sounded disappointed, which everyone knew was always worse. He looked around to see everyone staring at him, and he belatedly realized that he had said all of that out loud. "Whoops." "Yeah, whoops," Katsuki deadpanned. Kirishima felt his face heat up again. "I know that sounds bad." "That's because it is, dipshit." The blonde turned so he was looking him dead in the eyes. He almost got lost in the amount of emotion they held, so rare to see on his usually impassive face. "Remember what the nerd said when he spilled his guts about his quirk? He trusted all of us and came to us because he wanted other people to feel comfortable doing the same. You're coming to us now so we get to support your depressed ass." "I take it back," Gyro said strangely. "You are somehow so nice yet a complete jerk at the same time." "What's it to you?" he yelled, turning to her and letting a few sparks off his hands. "I'm allowed to be complicated, and I'm allowed to say that you, Kirishima Aijuro, are the strongest person I've ever met in my life, and I'm lucky to have you." Kirishima stared at his boyfriend and tried to ignore the tears that began to gather in his eyes. "How are you so aggressively nice?" "It's a gift," Gyro said, snickering. Bless her for keeping things light, or he probably would have been breaking down right then and there. She probably knew it too, if the soft look in her eyes was anything to go by. "As class rep, I'm wondering if we should bring this to the attention of Aizawa," Ida said seriously. "He might be able to help in ways we can't." Kirishima felt his blood rush to his ears in terror. "I really don't want to tell anyone else." "But this is a more serious issue than you just being sad sometimes," Momo said with a frown. She was looking at him almost like he was a little brother to her. He wondered if she had any siblings, but he doubted it because of what she had said the other day about her parents. "It sounds a lot like you have undiagnosed depression. Is this how you feel a lot of the time?" He looked down, shrugging a bit. Why did his friends always have to get right to the heart of the issue? "I mean, yeah, I feel better than I did in middle school, but not all that much." "That didn't mean he was depressed though, right?" He realized it made a lot of sense and felt his heart drop in defeat. Aizawa might be able to help you get counseling from the school or some sort of therapy, Ito reasoned. I really don't want to tell him, Kirishima said again. Please, Mina said, and oh god, she was actually crying now. Kirishima felt like a bullet was suddenly ripping through his chest when he saw the tear tracks on his friend's face. I know you don't want to, but I think it would really help you. And I don't, she hiccuped, leaning on Gyro, who started to rub her back. I don't know how we can help you not hate yourself, Kiri. I don't hate myself, he wanted to say. But that would have been a lie. He harshly blinked back tears. What would I even say to him? Hey, Mr. Aizawa, I'm sad, please send help. He felt a wave of relief as Mina laughed weakly, even if he knew for a fact she had caught what he didn't say. Sure, she said, wiping at her eyes despite the tears still rushing from them. Why not? At least think about it, Katsuki said in a voice he wouldn't have been caught dead using at the beginning of the year. Kirishima sighed. Fine. I'll think about it. Good. His boyfriend then wrapped his arms around him in a hug. He froze in surprise at the sudden display of affection, but melted into it not a second later. You're too good to feel bad about yourself. He's right, Kiri, Mina said with a smile, wiping the new tears from her face once more. You're brave and talented, and we all love you. You'll be one lit hero someday, that's for sure, Kaminari said, nodding his head solemnly like he had just bestowed wisdom on all of them. You're the man, bro, Siro stated. You're the manliest man. The manliest man est man why. He gets it, Shinso grumbled from off to the side. But yeah, he looked uncomfortable but still managed to look him in the eyes and smile. You're a great guy, Red Riot. Kirishima looked down and tried to hold back his tears, but with no luck. His heart was still beating loudly, but not with anxiety, something much more calm. Like love and relief that they didn't think he was a waste of space. I love you guys, Kirishima said, trying not to choke on a sob, his grip tightening on Katsuki's shirt. A chorus of affirmations and compliments rang throughout the room, and all Kirishima could think before the dam broke was, no wonder Midoriya cried so much. It wasn't so bad, though, especially with everyone else crying too and Katsuki's arms wrapped tightly around him. In his embrace, and now all his friends, too, he found the strength to smile. It was after their movie night in which everyone in the Baka squad had been surrounding him on all sides, making him feel safe and warm and loved, that he and Katsuki walked back to their dorms together hand in hand. Are you gonna be alright? Katsuki asked. Kirishima didn't think he would ever get used to him being this openly nice. He guiltily hoped it would last after the quirk wore off, even though he knew it made him uncomfortable to be so vulnerable. I don't know. Probably not, but I don't want to inconvenience you, Kirishima said before face-palming and letting out a loud groan. I just had to say that. Now there's no way you'll leave me alone. Do you want me to leave you alone? No. The response was immediate, and Kirishima felt his face heat up for what had to be the 100th time that night. He saw Katsuki smirk and died a little bit from mortification. I might not hate this quirk as much as I thought. Kirishima stuck his tongue out at him. You're mean. He opened the door to his room and stepped inside before sighing. I'm exhausted. He then fell straight onto the bed. Midoriya hadn't been kidding about the adrenaline crash. He had already been wearing pajamas for the movie night, so he didn't hesitate to get under the covers and almost pass out right then and there. And he would have if it wasn't for his boyfriend still awkwardly standing by the door. Come here, Kirishima said, already half asleep. Hug me. He was too tired to see the blonde blush, and next thing he knew he was climbing into bed beside him and hugging him tightly. For a while they just laid there in peace. I like it when you're nice, he found himself mumbling, but he was too tired to stop the words or even care about what he was saying. I like all the different parts of you and stuff. But I don't like myself a lot, so you've got to do it for me, even when the stupid quirk doesn't make you anymore. He felt Katsuki hum. Is that so? He said, snuggling closer. He felt him laugh a little against his chest, but it somehow almost sounded sad. I'll be sure to keep doing that then. For as long as you need it. He was at the edge of sleep when he felt a kiss to his forehead and heard whispered words. I'd hate myself twice as much to take away your self-hatred. You're too good for me, you know that? You're just pure fucking sunshine. That's Kaminari's nickname, he muttered into the pillow, only half listening. He was just so comfy, hugging his big pillow of a boyfriend that held his head close to his chest. He could hear the blonde's heartbeat there, and it was much more soothing and interesting than whatever words were being exchanged. He felt Katsuki laugh lightly against him once more, almost like he was looking at something precious. Whatever you say, He then fell asleep, and when he woke, he didn't remember their conversation at all. And he definitely didn't remember the single silent tear that had landed in his hair. Shota could tell there was something up with his students that Monday. It was obvious the way they all glanced at each other throughout class and fidgeted like there was no tomorrow. It was bound to happen. This whole truth Quirk situation would make them all face things they didn't want to face. He wondered what had happened this time. The last thing he had heard of was Midoriya telling them all about his quirk, and Shota wasn't stupid. He looked up his old records and found that before the entrance exam he had been registered as quirkless. And man, did Yagi get an earful from him that day. That probably explained the tension in the room the next day, but it had been gone the day after. What else could have happened over the weekend? He wasn't prepared to find out. Certain his students would stay stubbornly quiet. But as they were packing up their things, a shadow fell over Shota's desk. He looked up to see Kirishima standing there, if a bit awkwardly. "Sir, can I?" He cleared his throat and rubbed the back of his neck. "Can I talk to you?" It was at that moment he realized the rest of the room had gone quiet. He really wasn't sure what to think now. "Sure, we can talk in my office." Kirishima nodded jerkily. Shota thought that would be the end of everyone's strange behavior, but as they were leaving, they all called encouragement to the redhead. "You've got this, bro," Shiro said. "We love you, Kiri," Mina said, making a heart with her hands. "We believe in you," Midoriya exclaimed. "I'll be waiting outside the school for you," Bakugo said, and Shota wasn't sure what to make of the soft tone the boy was using. He was proud of him, of course, for being open, but it opened up a whole other can of worms. This obviously wasn't them all being mad at each other. That left a whole other range of issues it could be, and none of them looked good. And when he finally sat Kirishima down across from him on the old couch he liked to sleep on, he couldn't say he was too shocked to see the tears in the boy's eyes. "Talk to me, kid," Shota said after a moment of nothing. "I want to help you." Kirishima nodded and quickly wiped at his eyes. "I'm sad, please send help." "I'm sorry, what?" Kirishima smiled a bit in spite of himself. "Sorry, it's what Mina said I should say." And with that, Kirishima started to talk. It was hard listening to his unfiltered thoughts on his own self-worth, knowing he never would be this open normally. Shota was ashamed to say he hadn't been expecting one of his brightest students to be so depressed, even if it was seemingly well managed, but in retrospect it was obvious. The way his smile wasn't genuine half the time, or how it slipped completely when his friends stopped looking. He put a hand on Kirishima's shoulder. "I'm glad you told me," he said softly, not commenting on the silent tears on his student's face. If anything, the sight almost made tears well up in his own eyes. "I'm technically qualified for counseling, and if you ever need to talk, I'll be here. I can even set you up with something more official if you would like. We have therapists right here on campus." Kirishima looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes, and for a moment Aizawa wondered if he was too forward, but then he said, "I'm not sure. Can I think about it?" "Of course," Shota said. "I know something like this can be frightening, but you've done the hard part. Even if it was because of a quirk, you said something. And that takes true bravery." Kirishima looked at him. A light that wasn't there before shone in his eyes. "You really think so?" "I do." "So how'd it go?" Katsuki asked as soon as Kirishima stepped out of the building. "It went okay, I guess," he said without even having to think about it, for obvious quirk-related reasons. "He told me he could get me counseling, or that I could even talk to him." Katsuki hummed, looking down as they walked. "What'd you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it." He hummed again, almost like he was contemplating something which could have been true. Even if the rest of them were at the mercy of this stupid quirk, he was probably stubborn enough to keep his mouth shut when he wanted to. "I think you should do it." "Well, I know you think. I think you should because he's already helping me." Kirishima stopped dead, and to say he literally froze in his tracks would have been an understatement. He's what? He's helping me, Katsuki said, surprisingly grabbing his hand and pulling him back along. I've asked him to help me out with anger management and all my other shit. It's been going on for a while now. Kirishima couldn't stop staring at him. He felt something inside of him. He wasn't sure. Glow? It was a good feeling, that was for sure. He loved him. So much. I'm really, really proud of you, he finally said, not surprised when his voice came out slightly choked up. That's really good, really, really good. I'm aware. That's why I'm doing it. And he stopped to wipe his definitely not wet eyes with his free hand. You said it's helping? He saw him smirk slightly, his endearing oh-so Katsuki way of saying I know what I'm doing and I've got it all under control. It is. Which is why you should do it too. I believe in you. And damn, was it Katsuki's mission just to get him to cry? He had to deflect the conversation and fast, or he was going to become a sobbing mess all over again. And you're talking to Aizawa and not one of the others? Oh, like hell I'd talk to some random shrink, Katsuki said with slight disgust, making Kirishima unexpectedly laugh. Aizawa's really, really good at this stuff, trust me. And he knows us too. He's almost like some sort of, father figure. Kirishima snorted. If Aizawa's your dad, you must have a pretty weird home life. He was too busy laughing to see Katsuki stiffen ever so slightly beside him before forcibly relaxing. He wouldn't realize until later how close he had been to uncovering the truth. The horrible, horrible truth. Whatever, shitty hair, he said with a huff. Just tell me you'll think about it. I will. Honestly, you've almost convinced me. I just don't know if I want to do it with this stupid truth quirk. Yeah, I'd say no. We've stopped for now since I asked him to, but I am reading this stupid self-help book he gave me that we're supposed to talk about when this is all over. It's annoyingly helpful. Kirishima couldn't stop the wide smile from forming on his face when he leaned over to kiss the other's cheek. I love you, you know that? I love you too, but you missed, idiot. Kirishima was happy to aim correctly this time. Chapter 6, The Boy Born with Nothing. Notes. TWN notes. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Shoto wasn't entirely sure how to feel about this quirk. On one hand, it could be really annoying. When he normally would keep his mouth shut, it instead forced him to open it at the most inconvenient of times. Sure, he was normally a very blunt person, but he liked to think he was also a considerate person. This quirk was making him question that. However, this quirk was also the reason he was dating his crush. So, points to the truth quirk. It was also the reason he now knew how much Izuku had struggled in the past. It was just like him to listen to Shoto talk about how horrible his upbringing had been, but still not say a word about his own. It was one of the things he loved about him. He was so caring and selfless when it came to others, but it was also one of the things he hated about him. He never cared about his own well-being. Shoto didn't believe in fate, but he knew that something had to have pushed them together. How else could he be so lucky as to be able to love someone as amazing as Izuku? It didn't make any logical sense. Things didn't work out for Shoto Todoroki. Maybe this was all a cruel trick. They would live together after graduation, content with each other and the life that they would build, and it would be ripped from him just when he started to get used to being happy. Izuku could be fatally wounded in the line of duty, and he would be alone all over again like he had never left the cold halls of his father's house. Or he could just realize how much of a mess he really was and just leave. And now, because of the other night, Shoto had even more fears to add to his ever-growing list. Izuku had been depressed and slightly suicidal. That was the thing he feared most now that he would snuff out his own light when least expected. He would go back and relive his childhood 1,000 times over to keep that from ever happening. It also explained how self-sacrificing he was. Shoto shuddered at the thought. It was just that Izuku was so caring and compassionate and open all the time, truth quirk or not. It was endearing the way he spoke his mind and encouraged everyone around him no matter what. He loved him for it being so loving and inviting when he himself was used to being closed off for his own safety. Of course, with the truth quirk, it was more of an issue. That piece of trash can die, for all I care. Especially when Endeavor was suddenly brought up in the dorms. In a more private setting, it would have made Shoto laugh. But now, with everyone staring at the two of them, and Izuku now looking at him with wide eyes, it just made him freeze in terror. Everyone was obviously shocked by the words that came out of the Greenette's mouth, as something so violent was usually not his go-to and aimed at the #1 hero, no less. They were in the middle of some Disney movie, but someone must have paused it because the room was now dead silent. Izuku didn't seem to care. He was staring at Shoto in fear, like he would be mad at him or something. He could never see himself being truly angry with Izuku, but he understood why he might think he would be. "I'm so sorry," Izuku whispered, almost inaudible. "Why would you say that about the #1 hero?" Shiro asked apprehensively. "He's saved so many people." "Because he's the worst," Shoto answered for him, partially against his will. "He's a complete fraud of a hero." What had Izuku said a few days ago? Something about how the quirk could be overloaded when too much information was being processed at once. Yeah, that was probably happening with everyone because no one said a word. Every quirk had a weakness after all. Too bad it was such a stupid weakness and not something to, stop it altogether. "Why is he a fraud?" Uraraka asked eventually, sounding terrified by the sound of her own voice. Shoto felt his fists clench at his sides. He couldn't say. "He's abusive. He hurt my whole family, including me. He's the reason my brother's dead and my mother is in a mental hospital." He felt Izuku put a hand on his, and Shoto forced himself to unclench his own and take it. He hoped he hadn't accidentally drawn blood with his nails. "I'm so sorry," Izuku whispered again. "I didn't mean to." "I don't blame you," he said, because "it's okay" would have been a lie. He didn't look at anyone's faces as he spoke. That would have been way too much to handle. Not that this wasn't already far too much. "I think I'm with Bakugo on this whole quirk thing. It's the worst." He let go of his boyfriend's hand and stood, head still down. "I don't feel comfortable talking about this right now. I'm going to my room. Izuku, you can come if you want." He wasn't even 2 steps away when he felt a hand on his own once more. "Of course I'm coming. Good night, everyone." Shoto almost laughed at everyone's still gobsmacked expressions as they entered the elevator. They were in Shoto's room when he finally broke. "I'm so sorry," Izuku said as he sat next to him on the bed. I didn't even realize what I had said." "To be fair," Shoto said, throat tight, "I would have said the same thing. He can go die." Izuku gave an almost laugh, and it was breathy and shaky and made his shoulders tremble like an earthquake. "Yeah, I guess you're right." Shoto tried to ignore the tears in the other boy's eyes, but he couldn't. And for some reason, that was the straw that broke his back. Great crying. He loved crying. He hiccuped lightly, making Izuku's gaze snap to him and eyes widen almost comically. "And now I've made you cry." "It's not your fault," Shoto said around the lump in his throat, grasping Izuku's hand like a lifeline, even though he couldn't see him past the tears in his eyes. "It's not like they wouldn't have found out. It's literally the 2nd week of this stupid thing. I'm surprised it didn't happen already." "Are you gonna tell them anything?" Izuku asked before he immediately winced. "That was blunt. I hate this, but I have to ask. Are you just gonna leave it at what you said, or?" Shoto sighed shakily. "I don't know. You shared a lot with everyone already, right?" Despite his tears, Izuku smiled a bit, though it looked more like a grimace. "I guess yeah. They know the basics just like they do with you now. But I probably know a lot more about you than you know about me." "At this point we should all just do a Q&A, Shoto said, only half joking. "We'll all just sit in a classroom and ask each other about our inner demons like a discussion about quirk laws." Izuku laughed weakly, letting his head fall onto Shoto's chest like he would be safe from their problems there. "That would save us some time, that's for sure." And then, for some god-forsaken reason, Shoto latched his arms around Izuku and began to sob. "They know," he found himself saying, vision blurry. "They know, they know, they know." "They do," Izuku said. He sounded like he was crying too, and his arms were suddenly wrapped tightly around him as well. "And I'm so sorry. They won't judge you though. Promise. They accepted me and my past, so they'll do the same for you." "I suppose," Shoto said, suppressing a hiccup. But what if they tell Aizawa, or it somehow gets back to my father? He felt Izuku freeze below him. That would be very, very not good, that's for sure. The part about your father, not Aizawa. Why on earth would I want Aizawa to know? He didn't mean to sound harsh, but the panic in his chest was crawling up his throat and threatening to drown him, like he was being waterboarded by his fears. Kirishima went to Aizawa, and that turned out fine, and if you don't want this to get back to your father, you should tell everyone that. It's not like they can post it on social media right now, he said with a half-hearted shrug. Or go off campus. There's no reason to bring it up. But this quirk won't last forever. Izuku's words hit him right in the gut. They'll eventually be able to talk to their families again. They tell one wrong person and all hell could break loose. Yeah, okay, but if I bring it up, they'll ask questions. He almost flinched at the thought. That would be not ideal. Maybe you could just put a note on the fridge. Please refrain from ever speaking of Endeavor again. Signed, Shoto Todoroki. Shoto couldn't help but laugh through his tears. That could work. Izuku was a bit freaked out when Shoto started crying. Don't get him wrong, he was 100% ready to support him and all he had gone through, but Shoto didn't usually do feelings, at least to the degree of sobbing and shaking in someone else's lap kind of feelings. That's when it hit him this quirk wasn't just altering their words, it was altering their emotions. It made so much sense. With everything that had happened, Izuku sharing his entire life story with a class, Bakugo finally apologizing, Kirishima breaking down, and now this, it was so obvious now that he had figured it out. It had to have had something to do with true emotions, or what they would feel if they couldn't to lie to themselves about how they were feeling. You could still lie to yourself in your head, but your emotions would still be all over the place. That would also explain why both Bakugo and Shoto confessed their feelings so quickly on that first day. Shoto looked up at him. I can hear the gears turning in your head. What are you thinking? Izuku explained to him his new revelation. He watched Shoto's eyes widen before he put his head in his hands. Izuku had probably just blown his mind. Yes, you are blowing my mind. He looked at him bewildered. How do you do that? Izuku shrugged, unsure of what to say. There were more important things to focus on now. Practice? I don't think it matters. What matters is that we need to tell everyone else about this. He thought the dual-haired boy would readily agree, but an uncertain expression crossed his face instead. Should we, though? He asked. Tell them? Izuku stared. Why wouldn't we? Shoto rubbed the back of his neck. He looked down at the ground, deep in thought, for a long time. It wouldn't change anything, he finally said. It would just cause more panic. Aren't we all scared enough without this whole emotions thing thrown in? I guess, Izuku found himself saying. He could see where he was coming from. This wasn't something they could take lightly. Any new information about this quirk would certainly upset the rest of the class, but maybe we should tell Aizawa and see what he says. And we don't even know if we're right. We could all just be hormonal teenagers. Telling Aizawa seems like a good idea, but really, you think I would be like this if a quirk had nothing to do with it? He wiped the tears off his face and flicked them at Izuku to prove his point, to which the green-haired boy just snickered. Good point. I, however, seemed completely normal, which is why it took me so long to figure it out. Ain't that the truth? Hey. Shoto found himself next to Izuku when they told Aizawa the next day after class, and Aizawa agreed with Shoto they shouldn't tell the rest of the class, if only because it was just a hunch and not based on any actual proof. If it ended up coming out, which it probably would, given their situation, it couldn't be helped, but he told them to try and avoid it if possible. It would only cause more unnecessary grief, since there was pretty much nothing they could do about it. And even if that was the case, Shoto desperately wished it wasn't. Because ever since he came down for breakfast that morning, everyone had been treating him like glass, and it was making him feel like a bug under a microscope. Actually, no, not glass, more like a loose cannon. One that could go off at any moment, and he could tell they weren't sure if they wanted it to go off or not. He would like nothing more than to tell them about this whole emotions thing and let them forget all about him. Izuku had been eyeing him during their conversation with Aizawa, almost as if he were trying to get him to say something else. Which Izuku would never do, oh no. Never. He definitely wouldn't try and goad him into spilling his tragic backstory to their teacher. That was also one thing he desperately missed: sarcasm. He really would have liked to be so sarcastic, answering all his classmates' questions about his past. It was a good way to deflect. To not let them know he actually cared about what he was saying, even if he was still very bad at actually being sarcastic. Social interactions were still a bit of a challenge, of course, and he had only ever been sarcastic to his father for most of his life. It might have made things worse sometimes, but getting that tiny bit of control back was worth it to him. But yeah, he still didn't understand other social norms, which was why, that night at dinner, he was fully unprepared for the storm his classmates were about to bring. Izuku wasn't kidding about the whole honest emotions thing, that was for sure. "Why is your mom in a mental hospital?" Uraraka asked unceremoniously from across the table before her hands flew to her mouth. Izuku quickly stood up. "Hey, what if we didn't?" "I'm so sorry," she yelled, also standing up and bowing slightly at him. "I've been trying so hard not ask, and now I have, and now I'm just ruining all of this." "You're okay," Shoto said, trying to ease the tension. "You can both sit down." They did, if rather slowly. All chatter had stopped at this point in favor of staring at the mess unfolding at the middle of the table. Do you still want to know?" he asked quietly. "You all already know a lot." Was this how Izuku had felt the other night? If the hand suddenly gripping his own was anything to go by, then yes. It also meant there was really no point in fighting this any longer, especially when he would just be delaying the inevitable. "I mean, Uraraka had a bright red face. You don't have to tell us anything." "She poured boiling water on my face." "There." He said it. "She was having a mental breakdown because of my father's abuse. She hated my left side because it looked so much like him." Nobody said a word, and for a moment, all he could hear was the blood rushing to his ears and blood pumping through his veins. That was, of course, before all hell broke loose. Questions assaulted him from all directions, making it impossible to distinguish who was saying what or what they were even saying. It was too much, too many words, not enough quiet. He almost lifted his hands to cover his ears to just make it all stop. "Everyone shut up!" Bakugo suddenly yelled, slamming his hands on the table and forcing everyone to look at him instead. "Leave Icy Hot alone." "Kaken's right," Izuku said quietly. Eyes shifted to the boy who was now staring sadly at the table, head down so that his hair covered his eyes. "It's my fault you guys even know all this. Don't make it any worse." "It would have come out eventually," Shoto managed to say, squeezing his hand and doing his best to reassure him. "Don't blame yourself. And I was the one that asked her if she really wanted to know after all." "So that's how you got your scar," Momo said, gripping Jiro's hand so hard her knuckles were white. The other's hand wasn't much better, whose face also looked strangely blank. "Yeah." His throat was almost closing in on itself, which was weird because he knew he wasn't allergic to anything. Maybe he was allergic to emotions and this quirk would kill him, which honestly wasn't a horrible alternative. "I didn't see her for years after that. My father really only put her in the hospital because she scarred me." He didn't say the words, "hurt me," because Endeavor had done that every single day of his life. Why is he still a pro-hero? Shinso's voice was dark and had a certain edge to it. Why is he not in prison? "Money mostly." Shoto found himself internally chuckling at the sheer ridiculousness of society. Criminals always thrived at the top after all. He had a lot of it to throw at all his problems, including how he never bested All Might. "It's the reason I'm even here." He hadn't even realized he had said that before he looked back up and saw all of his classmates staring at him in abject horror. "What do you mean, the reason you're here?" someone choked out. Shoto sighed. This was gonna take a while. Could he knock himself out with his own ice? "I guess I should start at the beginning. Do any of you know what quirk marriages are?" "Isn't it like dog breeding?" Sue said bluntly. "But like, with people and powers." "Sue," Ida scolded. "Why would she said, face turning bright red. "I'm sorry, Ribbit." "It's okay," Shoto found himself saying. It really was the same, concept-wise, so he ignored the weird feeling that shot through his chest at the thought. "You're not wrong. Most people view it as unethical nowadays, but for the number 2 hero, buying a woman with an ice quirk wouldn't be too much of a problem as long as it was kept under wraps." All he had left to do after that was have a powerful child and train it to become the next #1 from the age of 5. He let his statement, which he had had pretty much no control over, with the words spilling out of his mouth like vomit, sink in. He couldn't imagine what was going through everyone's heads, but then again, he didn't have to. Everyone was shouting over each other once again. Shoto forcefully remained silent as they all unwillingly shared their opinions on how horrible and appalling and monstrous that was, like he wasn't painfully aware of that already. He hated thinking about it for too long, because then he started to hate himself on a very unhealthy level. He wasn't sure what made everyone finally calm down. Maybe they just got all the anger out of their systems, or perhaps they simply realized he wasn't going to try and talk over them. Maybe the quirk just wore off for the time being, since they probably would have stayed silent in the first place if they weren't under the influence of it. He still saw very hateful and somber expressions on most of their faces. They were probably unsatisfied with his lack of explanation, and he suddenly felt guilty. "I'm sorry for being so unhelpful with my words," he said somewhat awkwardly, trying his best to be sincere. "I'm trying to not think of it as much as I can while talking about it, but if you all really want to know." "That's not why we're upset," Ida said, voice full of anger, and maybe even tears. "We're angry at the man who hurt you and your family, and we won't ask any more of you." "I'm so sorry," Momo suddenly said. "I was there, I could have seen something, done something." "What are you talking about?" Shoto asked, absolutely bewildered by his friend's unprompted words. "Your father hosted some sort of dinner for pro-heroes and other high-status people, and my family was there. I didn't realize anything was going on. I even saw you, just sitting at the table like nothing was wrong." She broke down then, turning her head and burying it in Jiro's shoulder, whose face was still decidedly blank yet now as white as a sheet. Shoto felt his heart ache at the sight of the strongest girl in class and his oldest friend falling apart at the seams. "It's not your fault." Shoto reached across the table and grabbed her hand, shocking even himself at the show of affection. He barely registered the single fresh tear track on his own cheek as he stared at the table. He really only noticed when he saw it land in a perfect little droplet on the wood. "We were both so young, and none of the adults saw anything either. By that point, I knew how to hide everything pretty well." She squeezed his hand so hard he felt the circulation begin to cut off, but he didn't mind. "I'm still so sorry," she choked out, face still hidden. "You say he trained you. He even showed us the training room, and I didn't even realize there was blood on the floor." Shoto felt his heart skip a beat at that, but he made sure his face stayed impassive as he tried to reassure her. "Yeah, that was probably mine." Or not. This truth quirk was a real kick in the gut sometimes. He felt his stomach lurch when she flinched at his monotonous words, as did many others at the table. Maybe a neutral take on this subject wasn't the best idea if they were going to react in such a way. "I know you already know this," Izuku said from next to him, tightening his hold on the hand not occupying Yaomomo's, "but I really hate your father." "I'm aware," Shoto said, "but it's not like he ever did it viciously or out of hatred. He was just incredibly harsh in his training." "That doesn't mean shit," Bakugo said, and all eyes turned to the boy that was practically seething at the mouth. "When an adult hurts you, it's not okay, no matter their fucking motivation or whatever." Shoto tilted his head slightly in surprise. That wasn't something he would expect from Bakugo of all people. "You're right. I'm simply trying to let go of the anger that's been weighing me down for so long." Why anyone would want to let go of anger, I'll never know. Shoto's lips quirked upwards at that because really, it was such a Bakugo thing to say that it made him feel almost normal, even if it was only for just a moment. "I don't know. Maybe I never will, but at least he never beat me outside the training room." Yep, he hated this quirk. And maybe those words were the last straw, or maybe they were simply horrible enough on their own, but several of his friends and even people he hardly knew teared up or visibly started crying once he said them, if they weren't already. Izuku embraced him from the side, and suddenly people were standing up to join in Uraraka, Ida, Yaomomo, Tsu, Kirishima, and he didn't even know who else because he couldn't see past the tears gathering in his own eyes. "Maybe we should just start the movie night," he said eventually through the lump in his throat. He tried to ignore all the thoughts and feelings swirling throughout his entire being, much more in favor of a simple distraction. anything to keep his mouth shut and his classmates from becoming more upset. Yeah, Mina said with a slight snivel somewhere to his left. And did that mean she was part of this weird hug pile too? I can go set it up. But we are not letting you go. And true to her word, the setup of the movie night was drastically different from the previous ones. Shoto found himself dead center with Uraraka and Izuku at his sides, Momo, Itsu, and Mina in front of his legs, and somehow everyone piled onto that same couch. Someone was above him on the top of everything, and he was pretty sure it was Takoyami based on the feather that fell in his lap. Izuku was curled into his side, like he wanted Shoto to hold him and never let go. He happily obliged, putting an arm around him and letting Izuku rest his head on his chest. Love you, the greenette whispered next to his heart, making him melt. His boyfriend was certainly a badass on the field, but damn if he wasn't adorable like this. Love you too, he whispered right back. He hardly paid attention to the movie, too content in soaking in the warmth of everyone around him. When was the last time he had received this much affection? He wasn't entirely sure he ever had it at all. And man, was it wonderful. Izuku was a great hugger, but there was just something different about having all his close friends near him. You're mumbling, Izuku mumbled into his chest. That's usually my thing. Shoto found himself smiling softly. I'm just thinking about how much I appreciate all of this, I guess. He said it a bit louder so that Izuku could hear him better, but he guessed he was just a bad whisperer. Several people turned and gushed about how amazing he was and how much they loved him. Thanks, guys, he said, fighting against the growing blush on his cheeks. I just don't. I'm not used to this kind of affection. Someone paused the movie, indicating that once again the attention was back on him. And damn it, this movie night was supposed to be a distraction so that he didn't further upset his friends. Hey, Todoroki, Kirishima whispered. Shoto looked over to see him lower the remote, meaning he had been the one to pause the action sequence they were now looking at. Can I ask you something? About what you said earlier. Shoto felt a heavy weight settle in his chest, but nonetheless nodded. Sure. You said Endeavor was responsible for your brother's death. Did you ever do anything like this with him? Or other siblings if you had them? I just hate the idea of you being alone like you're implying. And wow, was Shoto not ready for the roller coaster of emotions that question took him on. Once his head stopped spinning, which couldn't have been longer than a few seconds, since no one looked overly concerned, he took a deep breath and answered. No, I never really spent time with any of my siblings. Was there an age gap? Sue asked sadly, and Shoto was once again reminded of her very large family that she had taken care of for so long. Did you not get along? He almost smiled at the irony of her question. I don't know how we would have gotten on. I wasn't allowed to see them. Why not? Uraraka asked angrily. Was isolation Endeavor's idea of good hero-making material? He shrugged. He didn't bother saying that was exactly what Endeavor thought, since she seemed to realize it a second after she said that. He held up a hand to keep her from apologizing. It's fine. And they weren't allowed to see me because I was his masterpiece, and I lived in a different world than them. But how did your brother die? Kaminari asked before turning red. Oh crap. His quirk killed him, Shoto said in lieu of delaying the inevitable. He watched as several people blanched back in shock at his bluntness, even with the truth quirk. Or it might have just been how horrible the statement itself was. My father tried several times before me to create a perfect mix of ice and fire. My brother got my father's flames and my mother's heat tolerance. It was a deadly combination. He felt something in his chest begin to shake, but he did his best to ignore it. He hardly even knew Taoya, so what right did he have to grieve? I'm sorry, Ida said, and Shoto turned to look and felt his heart twinge at the sight of tears on his face. Losing a brother. I know how painful that must have been. I barely knew him. Shoto thought the words would bring comfort to him, but they did just the opposite. He just began to shake harder, and Izuku and Uraraka both gripped his hands tightly. I never even got to know him. He was horrified when a sob started to build up in his throat. I don't even know how it happened. No one ever told me. I just found out at the dinner table and was expected to show up for evening training like usual. He couldn't take it anymore. Tears escaped his eyes like his boyfriend's did on any other day. Izuku had to have been right about the emotions thing. He had never let himself feel this way before about what had happened. He had always pushed it to the back of his mind, ignored it because there were more important things to focus on. But now he was being forced to accept the reality that he never knew his siblings or had any sort of normal childhood. "Am I broken?" he heard himself whisper. Probably. Izuku was always one for waterworks, and he definitely wasn't shying away from that now. His words surprised Shoto, although they probably shouldn't have. He was under this damn truth quirk after all. But we all are. And that was it, wasn't it? They were all just broken pieces of their upbringing shoved together into some semblance of a functioning human being. And wasn't that how everybody existed if you really thought about it? Nobody was whole. Nobody was untouched by the hands of grief. Some people were just better at hiding it than others. And usually he was better at it than this, but give him a break. He was emotionally screwed over by the actions of a toddler at the moment. Sue him. Which is probably why he asked his next question, something he never would say under threat of death normally. "Am I worth it to you guys? Or to you, Izuku?" "Of course you are," his boyfriend said without a hint of hesitation. Small murmurs of agreement could be heard, like they knew they were intruding on a moment, but for now he just had eyes on the boy in his arms. "You always have been, just like you said I was. Why else would I literally shatter myself?" Shoto felt himself nod distantly as silent tears continued to roll down his face. That's at a fair point. "Why is Endeavor still a hero?" Uraraka suddenly asked. "Like, I know you said money was an issue, but like if all of your siblings told the authorities, wouldn't at least something happen?" "Yeah, Shoto would be discredited as a hero before his career even began," Izuku said before nonchalantly adding, "That's why we're playing the long game." Everyone seemed to freeze at his words and the cool edge they held. It was unsettling to hear it in Izuku's voice, but Shoto had to admit it sounded kind of hot. He was not blushing. Definitely not. "The long game?" someone asked, and oh man, was that a mistake based on the evil glint in Izuku's eyes. "Yes, the long game that will put Endeavor in jail for life once Shoto is a pro-hero with credibility and we both have pull over the hero commission. I don't want to move, so I'm not getting the binders from my room, but I have it all memorized anyway. Ask away." Shoto smiled as Izuku answered everyone's questions about how he would be taking down Endeavor, like he couldn't use a paper clip against him and win if he had enough planning time. He loved the green-haired, slightly crazy dork he now called a boyfriend, and he wouldn't have it any other way. Getting rid of Endeavor was just a bonus. Chapter 7, Little Monster. Notes. TW and N notes. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Perhaps it was just as well that Todoroki's horrific past had come to light earlier that week, as it might possibly soften the blow of what was to come. Of course, Hitoshi didn't think he would experience the absolute emotional backlash of finding out the number 2 turned number 1 hero was an abusive piece of shit ever again. But maybe for everyone else his history would be a close second. Hitoshi wasn't worried about accidentally saying anything. He had been keeping his mouth shut since he was 5 years old, literally and figuratively, and therefore had a lot of practice. But of course that ended up not mattering because everything always went wrong somehow with him. He should have been used to it at this point. It was during a training exercise when he first fucked up. He wasn't sure why. He was normally completely fine shoving his emotions down to the point where he was almost a husk of a person. Which he was totally fine with, of course he was. He had had a lot of practice with that too. They hadn't worn their hero costumes in few weeks, so it had been a while since he had worn his voice changer. Which shouldn't have been an issue. He had never had a problem wearing it before, except for maybe the first time. He always ignored the panic in his chest until it faded away. It was usually fine once his focus shifted to the current goal of the exercise rather than old, suppressed memories. So why was he hyperventilating? "You good, man?" Kirishima asked, who was one of his teammates. At least he thought he was one of his teammates. He couldn't think of anything other than the current lack of oxygen in his lungs. Despite this, he did his best to suppress his feelings and brush off the other's concern. "I'm having a panic attack." Or not. This quirk would be the death of him. He was pretty sure the redhead immediately went on high alert, which was exactly the response Hitoshi had been going for. Perfect. "Dude, do you need me to get Mr. Aizawa?" His voice was full of panic, like that would help Hitoshi during his current panic attack. He could hardly blame him though, as Kirishima had recently spewed his own anxiety demons to the class. Hitoshi could understand. Yeah, he said against his will, or nearly said. It probably came out as more of a wheeze. He couldn't tell because his heartbeat was louder than his brain, and he felt like something was tightening over his rib cage. This was definitely not how he had wanted this day to go. He was suddenly a child again, and the thing on his face was heavier in a split second. He wanted it off. He needed it off. He started to claw at his face, trying to rid himself of this stupid contraption, like he hadn't already tried countless times to no avail. He just needed it off, and he didn't care how hurt he got. He felt moisture hit the fingers scraping at his cheeks. Was he crying? He didn't think so. He wasn't sure. Strong hands suddenly gripped at his own, causing him to freeze. He stopped clawing at his face, if only because he couldn't anymore. But maybe this person could help him, even if they really only wanted to hurt him. Get it off, he choked out. Get it off. It is off, a deep, soft voice said. I need you to breathe with me, Shinso. I can't. He was going to die from being crushed by whatever was around his chest, and the object on his face, not suffocation of all things. Get it off. It's not there anymore, the man said once more, bringing Hitoshi's hands down to their chest, which was rising and falling evenly. Copy my breathing. Can you do that for me? And maybe something about his voice calmed him down, and he found himself able to think a little more clearly. He found it extremely difficult and completely exhausting, but he did his best to match his inhales and exhales with him. And he realized the man was Aizawa, and that he was lying against a wall in ground beta, breathing hard. His voice changer was in his hands, and he realized that there was blood underneath his fingernails. Are you all right? Aizawa asked, slowly taking the device from him and setting it to the side. Yes, I'm perfectly fine. I don't know. I'm still a bit shaky and out of breath. He was going to find that child. He was going to find that child with that stupid quirk of his and tear him a new one. That's okay, his teacher said, putting a hand on his shoulder. Why don't you go see Recovery Girl? Kaminari, go with him. This was the point where Hitoshi realized they were definitely not alone, and all of his teammates from the exercise were close enough to him that it was clear they were obviously worried, but far enough away that it was clear they were uncomfortable. Kaminari looked like a deer caught in headlights. Sir. Are you able to take him or not? Of course I am, I just don't know if I'm the most qualified. Aizawa muttered something under his breath, something to do with idiot problem children, and rolled his eyes. You have working legs and you know where to go. That's qualified enough for me. I can't go because I'm the only one supervising this class right now, so I need to know I can trust you. The blonde looked at their teacher a moment longer before shrugging his shoulders with a grin. Sure thing, let's go, amigo. He offered his hand to Hitoshi, who couldn't help but simply stare at it for a moment, uncomprehending. When he eventually took it, Kaminari lifted him to his feet, surprisingly not too fast, and slung an arm around his shoulder. He found it strangely endearing and a bit more comfortable than he would have liked to admit. It was when they were out of earshot that Hitoshi found himself speaking again, voice slightly rough. You don't have to do this. I know where to go. Aizawa's orders, man, Kaminari said with a chuckle. Don't want to get on his bad side. He's not that bad, Hitoshi said. He kind of took me under his wing after the sports festival and helped me be able to get into the hero course. He's actually the closest thing I have to a father figure. He felt his face heat up instantly at his admission and wasn't surprised to see Kaminari's jaw drop. Aizawa wasn't exactly uncaring, he cared very deeply about each of his students to the point where he regularly risked his life for them, but he wasn't usually the most affectionate type. Hitoshi, of course, knew the truth. Aizawa loved them all like his own children and would probably adopt every single one of them at a moment's notice if the need arose. And maybe the need was already there for Hitoshi, but he didn't want to cause any more trouble for the man that had already helped him so much. Wow, I didn't realize you guys were so close, Kaminari said. Does your dad suck or something? Hitoshi felt his heart skip a beat. He forcefully bit his tongue to keep himself from impulsively answering, then spoke very carefully. I'm actually in foster care. It's nice being in the dorms since I'm so used to sharing my space. That was a good deflecting statement, right? Well, it turned out to be, since Kaminari took it and ran with it, talking about how great the dorms were and how close everyone had gotten. Hitoshi discreetly let out a breath he was holding, and then had to hold back a blush when Kaminari told him how happy he was that he was there with them and not that weird little purple creep. "I'm glad I've gotten to know you, dude," he said with a smile before shaking his head at himself. "This truth thing is really making me sappy, I guess." "I don't mind. I actually kind of like it," Hitoshi answered automatically, and now he needed to deflect fast before the blonde saw his red face. "Can I ask you a question?" "Shoot." "Why did you say you weren't qualified to take me to the nurse?" Kaminari almost looked startled for a second and maybe even a bit scared, but it must have been Hitoshi's imagination since he was grinning and sheepishly rubbing the back of his neck not a moment later. "Well, I'm the most likely to get distracted by a bird flying by and lose you, or just wander off the path in general." Hitoshi couldn't help but laugh. "I guess that's true," he said, before adding a jab of his own. "You've done a good job so far. Let's just hope no puppies wander on campus." Kaminari looked incredibly offended. "I don't care what the circumstances are, the league could be attacking. For all I care, okay, maybe I'd care a bit then, but never not wish for puppies." "Fine. If puppies show up, I give you permission to be 100% distracted. That's all I ask of you." Izuku was pretty concerned when the training ended, and he found out that Shinso had had a panic attack. He was one of his best friends, of course he was going to be worried. He was even more so when Aizawa informed them that Shinso was now with Recovery Girl. "Is he okay?" he had asked frantically before their teacher assured them that he was fine, and that he had simply scratched himself pretty badly in the face during his attack. Which was a bit weird if Izuku was being honest, but nonetheless felt relieved that his friend wasn't seriously hurt. Still, he asked Kirishima if Shinso was okay as soon as they got to the locker rooms, knowing that they had been in a group together. He said that physically, yes, he was alright, but apparently he had been really worried when Shinso had seemed to completely disappear into his mind. "I've never seen him like that, man," he said with a low voice, sitting on the bench and making no move to change out of his sweaty clothes. "I never would have thought, and it seemed to come out of nowhere too. Did I?" He suddenly looked terrified. "Did I do something?" "I'm sure you didn't do anything," Izuku said immediately. "Panic attacks can be caused by any number of things, and I know he trusts you." Kirishima hummed, "I guess." "Don't go blaming yourself," Katsuki said with a frown before setting a few sparks off his palms. "And don't make me force you to love yourself either." Kirishima's sweat dropped and gave an awkward grin. "Sure thing, bro. We were kissing 20 minutes ago. Do not call me bro." Denki wasn't stupid. Well, he kind of was, but that wasn't the point. The point was that he could tell something was bothering his friend Crush. Besides the obvious, his heart ached for Shinso and how his face was pretty much covered in blood, but he forced himself to not stare and instead act like everything was normal. Recovery Girl was able to heal Shinso, leaving him extremely tired to the point where he was almost fully leaning on Denki. He suspected this was the real reason Aizawa had wanted him to take him here, alongside the obvious. He let Shinso lean on him all the way to the dorms and tried not to feel too giddy about it. He was simply helping his friend. That was all. Totally. When they got there, everyone seemed to be hanging out in the common room waiting for them. "Hey guys," Denki said as he entered and helped Shinso kick off his shoes. "Is he okay?" Kirishima came up and asked immediately. He looked so distraught, and Denki remembered how scared he had looked earlier when Shinso had pretty much collapsed to the ground without warning. Of course, Denki had also been terrified when he vaguely heard the words "panic attack" followed by the sound of a body falling to the floor. "Other than being about to fall asleep as soon as he hits his bed?" he asked. "He's in ship shape. He's probably so tired because he never sleeps normally, so the healing just sapped all his leftover energy." "Oh good," Midoriya said with a relieved sigh. "Why don't we let him take a nap, and when he gets up we'll start the movie night. We can even let him pick the movies." "Sounds good to me," Shinso slurred from Denki's shoulder, making everyone's sweat drop and laugh awkwardly. "Good night, Shinso," Midoriya said, smiling sadly as Denki helped the other into the elevator. He knew why he looked so upset. It was weird seeing Shinso be this vulnerable, And it was because of something he couldn't control. He knew they all desperately wanted to help him, but they just didn't know how. Maybe they would find out soon, since this truth quirk was so great at forcing them to spill their guts. Denki really hoped it didn't come to that though. As much as he wanted to help his friend, he didn't want him to share his troubles before he was ready. He knew all about troubles. Hopefully nothing would be forced from his own trove of secrets, but he was good at pretending to be happy anyway. So nothing to worry about there. He tucked him into bed, and as he was doing so, Shinso grabbed his wrist. "Thank you," he muttered sleepily before rolling over and starting to snore. Denki very pointedly ignored the blush on his own cheeks as he left the room. They all hung out in the common room while they waited, mostly doing homework. Denki really wasn't a fan of this quirk, mainly because he could still say stuff he thought was true, but actually wasn't. Like, he could say the freezing point of water was 100 degrees if he actually thought that, meaning he could still get all the answers wrong on the worksheet. Totally unfair. And he knew the bushes outside weren't poisonous now because of this fact. He blamed Shiro, who had told him this when they first got to the dorms. He laughed quite hard when Denki was told the truth. Hitoshi woke with a groan. Which was weird, at least the waking up part. He didn't remember going to sleep, and he hardly ever woke up at all. He was more in favor of staying up night after night and adding value to the designer bags under his eyes. Then he remembered what had happened and just groaned louder and shoved his face into his pillow. He trudged down to the common room, still feeling tired but knowing he wouldn't be able to get back to sleep if he tried, and waved half-heartedly as the elevator doors opened. "Shinso," Midoriya said with a smile from the couch, instantly perking up at the sight of his friend. "How are you feeling? Did you sleep well? Do you need to go back to bed? Do you want to help us pick out some?" "I'm fine," he said before his friend could ask him any more questions. Hitoshi knew he meant well, but he could be a real chatterbox sometimes. He didn't mind, of course it was one of the qualities he admired about him, but he just couldn't keep up with the speed of the other's thoughts half the time. "Any movie suggestions, Purple Boy?" Mina asked from the floor, where she was browsing through a giant tub of movies. Since they didn't have Wi-Fi, and therefore no streaming services, the class had collectively begged Aizawa for movies once they ran out of the ones everyone had brought from home. And since US budget was so big, they ended up supplying them with more than they would need for an entire year. "I don't really know a lot of movies," he said with a shrug. "Pick out whatever you think would be good." "Wait, didn't you say you didn't watch a lot of Disney?" Kaminari asked, also digging through the bin. "Yeah, I didn't watch much of anything." "What about Zootopia?" he said brightly, pulling the disc out. It had a picture of a humanoid fox and a rabbit on it, which was interesting to say the least. "Sure, why not?" Hitoshi said with another shrug. "I trust your judgment." Something sparkled in Kaminari's eyes. "Epic, man." He ended up between the blonde boy and Midoriya as they waited for the movie to start up. Thankfully, no one was asking him any questions about what had happened earlier, because he wasn't sure he would be able to explain it if he tried. Well, that was sort of a lie. He knew exactly what had triggered the panic attack, but the issue was that it usually wasn't an issue. He wouldn't be surprised if it had something to do with this bloody quirk. The movie started, and he started to get the gist of it. Everyone was an animal, but they could do everything humans could, including have prejudices and hate things that were different from them. He huffed quietly in his seat. Some things would always be the same no matter where you went or what anthropomorphic creatures you observed. He thought it was ironically funny until it suddenly wasn't. The fox in the movie was suddenly a little kid, and he was joining his local Cub Scouts or something. He raised his little paw on screen. "I, Nicholas Wilde, promise to be brave, loyal, helpful, and trustworthy." "Even though you're a fox?" "What?" Hitoshi watched as the kid was roughly pushed to the floor and held down by the others. No, what did I do wrong, you guys? No, please, tell me, what did I do wrong?" His stomach plummeted to his feet when the stupid metal contraption from his nightmares was brought on screen, and when it was forcefully put on the boy, he felt his lungs and heart completely stop working altogether. "What did I do? No." The rodent chuckled darkly. "If you thought we would ever trust a fox without a muzzle, you're even dumber than you look." The fox ran from the building, and Hitoshi was vaguely aware that he was now standing up and moving through the panicked haze he was now stuck in. Next thing he knew, he was on the floor, struggling to get air into his lungs and staring blankly at the elevator doors right in front of him. He could hear blood pounding in his ears, and he felt like a snake was constricting his chest, but none of that mattered because he knew the stupid thing was back on his face and he had to get it off. He started to attempt to pry it off, but hands caught his wrists and held them down at his sides. He nearly whimpered, not knowing who was touching him or if they were going to hurt him. He was distantly aware of several bodies around his own, and that made his heart rate pick up, but he really only cared about whoever was holding his hands hostage and forcing him to stay in this hell. One of his hands was suddenly brought up to his chest, right over his heart, which made him freeze. Then his other hand was brought over someone else's chest, where he could feel a steady heartbeat. Even though it was slightly faster than he somehow knew to be normal, it was dramatically slower and steadier than his own. So, Shinso. The noise was slowing, filtering in. Shinso, to copy my breathing. That for me? He noticed the breathing of the other chest was very up and down, while his own was very sporadical and fast, which was weird because it felt like his rib cage was closing in on itself and forcing his lungs to shut down. Nevertheless, he tried to do what he was told, partially because he somehow knew he had to, and partially because another smaller, more childlike part of him knew that doing what he was told would make the pain go away quicker. He forced himself to take even breaths and got a weird sense of déjà vu when it started working and noise slammed back into him like a bullet train. The movie must have still been playing since he heard some weird music. No one must have turned it off on their way over because every one of his classmates was now distantly surrounding him and pretty much dissolving into panic themselves. Some of them were muttering encouragement at him, others were muttering to themselves, and some were just standing with the most paralyzed expressions on their faces. If the circumstances were different, Hitoshi might have even laughed. He coughed roughly instead, as the greedy lungfuls of air he was now getting were a shock to his system. A hand was on his back now, rubbing soothing circles. He looked over and saw it was Kaminari, who smiled at him shakily. "Hey man," he whispered. "Hey," Hitoshi said, sounding broken and like he had been eating glass and feeling like it too. "Are you all right?" came a quiet voice from in front of him. He turned again to see Midoriya sitting there, still holding Hitoshi's hand to his chest like it was fragile and precious. "Maybe?" he managed to choke out. "I don't know. Probably not." Someone must have finally paused the TV because the silence rang through the room. "Let's scoot over a bit, yeah," Midoriya said softly, helping Hitoshi slide back so he could lean against the back of the couch. He did so gratefully, exhausted from what had just happened. "Here," Uraraka said, handing him a glass of water. He thanked her before downing the entire thing faster than he ever had before, including after intense workouts. It slightly concerned him. "You thirsty?" Bakugo asked nonchalantly, making Hitoshi give a light snort. He was kneeled down next to him too, which would have normally surprised Hitoshi, but there had been so many surprises these past few weeks that it somehow just felt right that he was by his side, and he didn't question it. "Thank you," he said again as he gave the glass back to the girl. I'm sorry you guys had to see that." "It's totally fine, Shinso," Midoriya said. "Maybe." He looked up at him nervously like he was going to breach a sensitive subject, and knowing him, he probably was. "Maybe you could tell us your triggers so you don't have to go through that anymore. We could help you avoid them." And Hitoshi knew he meant well, of course he did. But that didn't stop the raw fear that flashed through his heart at the question, and the blood he almost drew from his lip from biting it so hard. Maybe he could talk around the subject and speak very, very carefully. "I don't want you guys to be inconvenienced by me," he said finally. "You're not an inconvenience," Todoroki said, and Hitoshi realized that he was right next to him too, between Midoriya and Kaminari. "If I'm not one with my garbage baggage, then you aren't either." "Shoto." "What?" He couldn't help but smile lightly at the couple's banter. Maybe Todoroki had a point. Every other person had been accepted for who they were in the past, even Bakugo, who had straight up bullied Midoriya for years. If they could forgive him and support Kirishima and Mina and Sue and Momo and Midoriya and Todoroki, maybe they could accept him too. He turned to the boy who was still absent-mindedly rubbing his back. "Remember what I told you on our walk?" he asked Kaminari with a sad smile. "That you were in foster care," he said instantly. Hitoshi knew the blonde was smart, but not that smart. Screw everyone else for calling him dumb when he could make connections that fast. He hummed his confirmation. It's because my parents dumped me on the side of the road as soon as my quirk developed. I was homeless for days before a pro hero found me and sent me to the authorities, and somehow it just got even worse. The words had slipped out of his mouth like butter, leaving him completely 100% mortified. He had only meant to say that his parents had given him up, and that foster care was less than ideal. That was not what he just implied. That's horrible, Kirishima said, clearly near tears. Hitoshi still found all this caring about him business very weird. Your parents were quirkish jerks, and you didn't deserve any of that. Yeah, don't listen to a word they said, Bakugo insisted, arms crossed and looking downright murderous. Just 'cause they gave birth to you doesn't mean shit. If only they were the only ones, he answered before regret filled him once again. Many members of their class had expressed their disdain for this truth quirk, and he was truly starting to understand the full-bodied loathing they all had. Anyone else that did anything to hurt you is wrong, Shinso, Jiru said, kneeling down next to him and grasping his free hand tightly. Even if they saw you as a villain for something you had no control, wait. Her voice suddenly filled with horror and her eyes widened. She slowly turned to face him dead on, and somehow he knew she had figured it out. She was a smart one, just like Kaminari. The movie, the scene, your quirk, the voice changer. She trailed off, clearly horrified by what she had realized and not wanting to say it aloud. He wasn't sure if anyone else understood yet, so he decided to just go ahead and bite the bullet. The muzzle, he finished. He said it so silently you could have heard a pin drop over him, but he knew for a fact that every single one of them heard, if only because of the intense, death-like silence that followed. He felt someone suddenly put a hand on and tightly grip his arm, and wasn't too shocked to realize it was Bakugo, who was looking at him with pained eyes while biting his lip. He gave him a tiny, strained smile. The blonde didn't return it. Why didn't you tell me? A new voice asked brokenly. And no, he was not expecting to look up and see Aizawa standing in the doorway. How long have you been there? He couldn't help but ask. He then noticed Ida, standing off to the side of the door, breathing hard and steam coming out of his engines. He must have ran and got their teacher when he started to have his panic attack because he was responsible and all that other annoying crap. Long enough, Aizawa said as he started to walk over. You said your foster homes weren't that bad and that you were fine in the system. He knelt down in front of him, right between Midoriya and Bakugo, and Hitoshi could see the pain in his eyes as he muttered, almost as a joke, God, I don't know why I believed you. I'm pretty convincing, he said, half jokingly, half serious. Aizawa smiled sadly at him. I told you I could have gotten you out. Why did you say no? A lot of reasons, I guess, he whispered, not noticing how he was physically closing in on himself. I was going to be living in the dorms anyway. And it's horrible, you know? I was this little monster who wasn't allowed to speak. Ever. If I did, it was shoved on my face for days. And if I even tried to speak while it was on. He bit his tongue to keep himself from scaring his classmates. It wasn't pretty. I'm so sorry, Aizawa said as he put a hand on his shoulder. Hitoshi didn't even care anymore as he started to pull at his own hair. Words slipped out brokenly and unintentionally, and maybe even somewhat intentionally, almost like he had been wanting to say them for so long but just didn't have the courage or strength to. And I didn't want to burden you, since you had already done so much for me, and I didn't want to pile fixing my garbage life onto the list, even if you're the closest thing I've got to a dad. Aizawa then did something totally unexpected and yet somehow completely expected at the same time. He hugged him. And you've become like a son to me, he whispered, quiet enough that no one else would hear. He wasn't crying, he wasn't. And he definitely didn't suppress a sob as he hugged his mentor father figure back. Do you want to come to my place? Aizawa asked, just as quiet as before. We can deal with everything in the morning. Yeah, he said through the lump in his throat. But can we finish the movie first? He said that part loudly enough for everyone else to hear, and hopefully it did the trick and lightened the mood. Plus, he wanted to see someone who was seen as a villain and went through what he went through get a happy ending, even if it was just a silly cartoon. Of course, Purple Boy, Mina choked out, with a very forced laugh to go with it. You heard him. Movie and cuddles time pronto. We love you so much, don't you ever forget it. Tearful and enthusiastic words of agreement filtered into his ears. He just cried harder, burying his head in Aizawa's neck and gripping his shirt tightly to hide just how much he was shaking. And soon enough, movies and cuddles time it was, with Aizawa's arm over his shoulders and Midoriya on his other side, with Kaminari, Kirishima, and Bakugo all sitting in front of his legs. He had never felt so loved and appreciated before. His only wish would have been to get rid of the tears in his eyes so he could see the movie properly. And the fox did get a happy ending. Maybe he could, too. They arrived at Aizawa's little apartment on campus after midnight, where Yamada was still grading papers in the kitchen in his pajamas. It was weird seeing his hair down, even if he had already seen it so many times before. Hey babe, he said as he glanced up before doing a double take. And hey to you too, little listener, what brings you here so late? Hitoshi glanced at Aizawa and hopefully conveyed his plea for help with his eyes. Thankfully, he understood. We'll talk in the morning, the man said quietly, and his tone obviously made the other instantly alert, so he was quick to ease his husband's nerves. Everything is okay now. Just know we'll have another reason to ask Nezu for a bigger apartment. Yamada seemed to understand immediately, while Hitoshi most certainly did not. Gotcha. He turned to him with a kind expression. I can show you to the guest room. Although I guess it's your room now, unless Nezu wants to actually give us some more space, and he's gonna have to if Eri's gonna be living here too, the little demon mouse. My room? He asked, almost in a daze. Am I missing something here? Yeah, your stuff to put in your room, but we'll figure that out later. You'll still sleep in the dorms, of course, but this will be for breaks and school vacations. Aizawa gave him a sly smile, the same one he had whenever he handed out a multiple-choice quiz and made all but one of the answers B. I told you I would get you out of there, didn't I? Wait, you mean? His smile just grew. You said I was like a father to you, right? His words cut off with a grunt as Hitoshi practically tackled him in a hug. His throat was tight, but he somehow managed to speak. Thank you. Because this was all he had ever really wanted for as long as he could remember. And Hitoshi would be sure not tell anyone how choked up Aizawa sounded when he ran his fingers through his hair and answered, No problem, child. Yamada joined the hug not too long after that, and for a wonderful moment, they all just stood in the kitchen, not caring about the rest of the world. They both led him to his room shortly after that, where for once he found himself actually able to fall asleep. Even if it was on a bumpy old guest mattress that they promised to replace as soon as possible, because for the first time in a long time he felt like he was home, and he had never slept so soundly in his life.